Hello guys, welcome to Fiction Quest. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto ate a Kitsune god, devil fruit and fell in love with Nami? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Fox and the Navigator. The rain was a cold, miserable veil, turning the churned earth of the Kokoyashi Grove into a slurry of mud and despair. It tasted of salt and blood. Nami knelt in that mud, the world a smear of gray sky and leering monstrous faces. The ornamental pinwheel on Genzo's hat spun in the wind, a lonely splash of color in a world that had none left. The weight of 8 years, of every stolen berry, of every feigned smile and every silent tear, pressed down on her until her bones ached with it. Her arm throbbed, a furious, hot pain where she'd driven the knife into her own flesh. The blood, dark and shockingly real, slicked her skin. It was a physical manifestation of her shattered soul. She had tried. Gods, she had tried. For Belmir, for Nojiko, for the village, she had sacrificed her childhood, her name, her very identity, all for a promise that had just been ripped away and laughed at. Luffy. The name was a raw, ragged shriek, torn from the deepest part of her. What do you know? You don't know anything. The boy in the red vest and straw hat stood before her, his expression uncharacteristically grim. He'd just placed his precious hat on her head. A treasure. The gesture was so simple, so pure. It felt like a brand against her filthy, compromised existence. Yeah, I don't know, he'd said, his voice low. You don't understand what it's like. She sobbed, her fingers digging into the mud, curling into fists of helpless rage. To be bound by a promise, to have your whole life stolen. The fish men laughed. Their guttural, bubbling chuckles were the soundtrack to her suffering. Arlong, the saw-nosed monster who was the architect of her entire life's misery, stood preening, his webbed hands on his hips. Look at her, yahahaha. The little human witch, finally broken. What a pathetic creature. Nami barely heard him. Her world had collapsed to the space between her and the boy with the stupid, wonderful hat. She looked up, her vision blurred by tears and rain, and screamed the words she had never allowed herself to say, the plea she had buried for 8 long years. Luffy, help me. Silence. The rain fell. The pinwheel spun. The fish men snickered. Luffy's face was a mask. The shadow from the hat's brim hid his eyes, but she could feel the change in the air around him. He took a deep, steadying breath. Then, he threw his head back and bellowed, a roar that seemed to shake the very clouds. Of course I will. He turned, his back to her, facing Arlong Park. And he started to walk. Zoro, Sanji, and Usopp fell into step behind him, a grim, determined line. It was a beautiful, heroic, and utterly hopeless sight. 4 boys against an army of fish men, the strongest pirates in the East Blue. A final, futile stand. Hope was a cruel, beautiful lie. Arlong laughed, a booming, arrogant sound. You 4, against me. Don't make me laugh. I'll enjoy tearing you limb from limb while she watches. He took a step toward her, his shadow falling over her small, kneeling form. But first, I think our little traitor needs a final punishment. A reminder of who she belongs to. His webbed hand, hard as iron, reached for her. Genzo and Nojiko screamed her name. The world slowed. This was it. The end. A meaningless death in the mud. Then, the sea exploded. It wasn't a cannonball or an attack. It was a silent, violent eruption of pure, incandescent gold. A pillar of shimmering, liquid light erupted from the waves 100 yards from shore, climbing into the stormy sky like a second, defiant sun. It held for a breathtaking second, bathing the entire island in an ethereal, divine glow. Before collapsing back into the churning ocean, the rain hitting the spot where it had been sizzled into steam, creating a rolling fog that drifted toward the shore. Every single person, human, fish man, and straw hat pirate, froze, staring at the impossible phenomenon. What in the hell was that? A fish man muttered, his bravado gone. Arlong narrowed his eyes, his hand hovering over Nami. A trick, a marine weapon. A figure walked out of the steam. He was tall, with sun-kissed blonde hair that was plastered to his face by the sea and the rain. He wore The tattered remains of black pants and an orange jacket that was torn to ribbons, revealing a lean, powerfully built torso cross-hatched with the pale lines of old scars. He wasn't walking on the water, but with each step, a small, disc-like platform of golden energy solidified under his boot just long enough for him to press off it, dissolving an instant later. He moved with a languid, almost lazy grace. His head tilted as he took in the scene. His eyes were what held Nami's gaze. They were a startling, piercing blue, and they held an ancient calmness, the unnerving placidity of a deep ocean. They were the eyes of a man who had seen too much, a soldier surveying a battlefield. He looked at the kneeling girl, the imposing fish man, the terrified villagers, the four determined boys. His gaze lingered on Nami for a fraction of a second, a flicker of something unreadable, recognition, empathy, before settling on Arlong. The stranger's expression didn't change, but the air around him grew heavy, charged with a pressure that had nothing to do with the storm. Naruto Uzumaki's head was pounding. One moment, he had been locked in a dimension-tearing clash of fists with Kagaya, the rabbit goddess. The combined power of his six paths sage mode and Kurama's chakra meeting her own world-shattering might. The next, a sickening lurch, a feeling of being turned inside out, and then, water. Cold, salty water, and a sky that felt fundamentally wrong. He had surfaced, his senses screaming at him. The very nature of the energy in the world was different. It was wilder, less refined than the chakra he knew. He was somewhere else. And he was alone. The connection he'd always had, the comforting, grumpy presence of Kurama in the back of his mind, was gone. But it wasn't an empty space. It was full. It felt as if the fox hadn't been extracted, but had somehow fused with his very soul, becoming something new, something that hummed with a power that felt older and more primal than even the 10 tails. He'd taken one step toward the shore, and the golden energy had simply been there, a solid thing to stand on. It responded to his will, not his chakra. It was instinct. Now, he stood before a tableau of textbook tyranny. A terrified populace, a broken young woman, and a smug, monstrous bully. He didn't know the names or the politics, and he didn't care. He knew injustice when he saw it. It was the same ugly story, just with different faces. Arlong scoffed, finally breaking the spell. Who the hell are you? Another one of her pathetic human friends. He gestured with his head toward Nami. You're interrupting something important. The blonde man, Naruto, didn't answer. His gaze flickered to the fish men fanned out behind Arlong. He saw their sharp teeth, their claws, their confidence. And he saw them as what they were, obstacles. Hey, boss, should we get him? Asked one of the octopus fish men. He's just one human. Kill him, Arlong grunted, his attention returning to Nami. The fish man, Hachin, lunged, his 6 arms brandishing swords. Take this, 6-sword style, Naruto didn't even seem to look at him. As the swords descended, he took a half step to the side. It was a simple, economical movement. But he flowed like water, moving just enough for all 6 blades to miss. His right hand came up, not in a fist, but with his fingers relaxed. He tapped the center of Hachin's chest. It looked gentle, almost casual. There was a dull thump, like a mallet hitting a side of beef, and the octopus fish man's eyes rolled back into his head. He didn't fly backward, he just crumpled, all his limbs going limp as he crashed to the ground in an unconscious heap. Another fish man, a corpulent one with large lips, charged from the other side. Shoo! Naruto pivoted on his heel. His leg swept out in a low arc. It didn't look particularly fast, but it connected with the fish man's shins with a sound like a tree branch snapping. Chu shrieked, his legs folding beneath him, and as he fell, Naruto's elbow caught him precisely at the base of his skull. He was out before he hit the ground. One by one, the other fish men officers charged. Kurubi, a ray fish man martial artist. A blur of movement, a precise palm heel strike to the chin. A sickening crunch. He was down. It took less than 10 seconds. 10 seconds of fluid, unhurried, brutally efficient motion. He hadn't broken a sweat. He hadn't even changed his expression. Luffy's jaw was on the floor. Zoro's hand, which had been resting on his swords, tightened, his single visible eye wide with disbelief. What? Is that speed? Sanji's cigarette fell from his lips. He didn't even use his hands for the last one. He's not fighting. He's cleaning up. The remaining fishmen soldiers, dozens of them, who had been laughing moments before, were now paralyzed. This wasn't a fight. This was a culling. The stranger's very presence seemed to radiate a cold, predatory aura that their base, aquatic instincts screamed at them to flee from. Arlong, finally, turned his full attention to the interloper. The amusement was gone from his face, replaced by a furious scowl. You bastard. You laid your filthy hands on my men. Naruto finally spoke. His voice was calm, a low baritone that cut through the sound of the rain. They were in the way. That simple, dismissive statement was more insulting than any threat. It was a declaration that they weren't even worthy of his consideration. For Arlong, a man whose entire identity was built on the concept of fishman superiority, it was the ultimate slight. In the way, Arlong roared, his muscles bulging. We are the fishmen. The pinnacle of evolution. You are a lowly human. An insect. He pointed a webbed finger at Naruto. I am going to tear you apart, piece by piece, and show you the difference in our species. He charged. For a creature of his size, he was terrifyingly fast, the ground shaking with his steps. He drew the Kuribaki, a monstrous Zanbato with teeth like a shark's jaw, and swung it in a massive, horizontal arc meant to cleave a man in two. Nami screamed, a reflex of pure terror. Naruto didn't move. He didn't dodge. He didn't even raise a hand to block. He just stood there, watching the behemoth blade screaming toward his neck. And then, it happened. From his lower back, 3 tails of pure, golden light erupted. They weren't made of fur or flesh, but of solidified, shimmering energy, like a contained supernova. They moved with a life of their own, whipping through the air and meeting the Kuribaki with a sound that no one there had ever heard. It wasn't the clang of metal on metal. It was a deep, resonant hum, a chord of cosmic power that vibrated in their very bones. The massive blade, which could shear through stone, stopped dead, caught between 2 of the golden tails as if held by a vice. The third tail, sharp and pointed as a spear, rested a mere inch from Arlong's throat. Arlong's eyes were wide with shock and a dawning, animalistic fear. He tried to pull his weapon back, his powerful muscles straining, but it wouldn't budge. It was like trying to wrestle with a mountain. What are you? Arlong choked out, his voice a strangled whisper. Naruto's blue eyes seemed to glow faintly in the gloom. You talk a lot about species, he said, his voice still level, but now with an undercurrent of something cold and dangerous. Let me show you the difference. He pushed. It was an impossible display of strength. With a flex of the golden tails, he didn't just shove Arlong back, he lifted the 400-pound fish man off his feet and threw him, sending him tumbling end over end through the air. Arlong crashed through the stone wall of his own fortress, Arlong Park, with a sound of shattering rock and a strangled cry of pain. Naruto took a slow, deliberate step forward, the golden tails swaying gently behind him. The rain seemed to avoid him, sizzling into nothingness a foot from his body. Is strange power creating an invisible shield. The remaining fishmen, who had been frozen in fear, now broke. They screamed, a cacophony of terror, and scrambled over each other, trying to get back to the water. Back to the safety of the sea. They didn't see a human. They saw a monster far more terrifying than the one they had followed. From inside the ruins of the wall, Arlong staggered out, blood trickling from his mouth. His eyes were wild, his arrogance replaced by pure, feral rage. You'll pay for that. I'll crush you. Shark on darts. He launched himself forward like a torpedo, his saw-like nose aimed directly at Naruto's heart. He was a living projectile, a blur of speed and killing intent. Naruto's response was brutally simple. He didn't bother dodging. As Arlong closed the distance, he swatted him out of the air with one of his golden tails. The impact was like a cannonball hitting a wall. Arlong was sent spinning, crashing into the ground and carving a long trench in the mud. He tried to get up, roaring in frustration, but Naruto was already there, standing over him. Before Arlong could even think to use the water, Naruto's foot slammed down on his back, pinning him to the earth with crushing force. There was a sound of cracking vertebrae. You built your strength on the fear of the weak, Naruto said, his voice a low growl. His eyes were blazing now, the blue so intense it was almost white. He pressed down, and Arlong screamed, a high, pained sound. You call them insects. You preach superiority while preying on those who can't fight back. He knelt, his knee pressing down on Arlong's spine. He grabbed the fish man's head, forcing him to look at the horrified faces of the villagers, at the crying form of Nami. Look at them, Naruto commanded, his voice devoid of all warmth. This is the only power you've ever known. The power of a thug. A jailer. It's pathetic. Damn you, human. Arlong spat, blood and mud mixing in his mouth. Naruto's golden tails coiled, their light intensifying. He wasn't gathering energy for a massive attack. It was something else. The pressure in the air became immense, a physical weight that forced everyone, even Zoro, to their knees. It was a wave of pure, unadulterated dominance. An alpha predator declaring its territory. I've fought gods and demons, Naruto whispered, his voice for Arlong's ears alone, a confession that was also a death sentence. You're just a fish. A loud, overgrown fish. He didn't use a jutsu. He didn't need one. He wrapped one of his energy tails around Arlong's prized saw nose, the symbol of his power and his pride. Arlong's eyes widened in terror as he realized what was about to happen. There was a sickening, grinding crack. Then another, and another. Naruto systematically, methodically, and brutally broke Arlong. He didn't just defeat him, he dismantled him. He shattered his jaw, broke his limbs, and crushed the very things that made him a threat. The fight was over in less than a minute. A horrifyingly one-sided execution. When it was done, Arlong was a broken, whimpering heap, conscious enough to feel every ounce of his humiliation and defeat. Naruto stood up, the immense pressure vanishing as if it had never been. The three golden tails receded, melting back into his body like light into a lens. He stood there, panting softly, the rain once again beginning to slick his blonde hair to his forehead. The divine monster was gone. In his place was just a young man, surrounded by the wreckage he had wrought. Silence reigned over Kokoyashi village. The only sounds were the soft patter of the rain and the distant, panicked splashing of the last of the fish men fleeing for their lives. Then, Naruto turned. He walked past the awestruck straw hats, his gaze fixed on the girl still kneeling in the mud, the straw hat still perched on her head. He stopped in front of her, the blood and mud on her a stark contrast to his strangely pristine state. The cold, terrifying light in his eyes was gone. They were just blue again, filled with a deep, profound exhaustion. He offered a hand, his palm open and unthreatening. His expression softened, and for the first time, a hint of a gentle smile touched his lips. Are you all right? Nami stared at his outstretched hand. It was strong, steady, and clean. It was the hand of the monster who had just obliterated her lifelong nightmare. It was the hand of the man who had just saved her world. The question was so simple, so human, it shattered the last of her composure. Tears, not of grief but of overwhelming, unbelievable relief, streamed down her face. She took his hand, and his grip was warm and firm. He pulled her to her feet effortlessly. The straw hat tumbled from her head. Luffy, who had scrambled over, caught it before it hit the mud. He stared at Naruto, his usual goofy grin replaced by a look of star-struck wonder. Whoa, was all he could manage. The villagers, who had been cowering in fear, slowly began to realize what had happened. Arlong was defeated. The fish men were gone. They were free. A tentative cheer went up, then another, until the entire grove was filled with a rising crescendo of joyous, disbelieving celebration. Nami didn't join in. She couldn't take her eyes off the stranger. He had just unleashed a power that defied all comprehension, a force of nature wearing a human face. And now, he was looking at her with a quiet concern that felt more real and more potent than the divine fury he had just unleashed. She couldn't find the words. Thank you. Who are you? What are you? He just nodded, seeming to understand. He let go of her hand and took a step back, giving her space. He looked around at the celebrating villagers, at the cheering straw hats, at the world he had just saved. And in his eyes, Nami saw it again, that profound, soul-deep loneliness. He was a god in a storm, and he was utterly, completely alone. The party was a force of nature unto itself. Once the shock wore off and the reality of their liberation sank in, Kokoyashi village exploded with a joy that had been suppressed for nearly a decade. Barrels of sake that had been hidden away were rolled out, kitchens were fired up. And music, tinny and exuberant from an old phonograph, filled the air. The rain had stopped, and the setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, as if the world itself was celebrating. Naruto sat on the steps of a small house, a plate of food balanced on his knee, mostly untouched. He'd answered their questions as best he could, which wasn't very well. You were awesome. That pow and whoosh, and then your butt grew glowy things. Luffy had exclaimed, gesturing wildly. I'm Monkey D. Luffy, the man who's gonna be king of the pirates. You're super strong. Join my crew. Naruto had managed a small, tired smile. My name is Naruto, and I don't know what a pirate is. This statement had caused a collective spit take from Usopp and Sanji. You don't know what a pirate is? Usopp had shrieked. Where are you from? Under a rock. Something like that, Naruto had replied, his voice quiet. Now, he watched the chaos. He watched Luffy inhaling a mountain of meat, his elastic body a source of constant low-level surprise. He watched the green-haired swordsman, Zoro, in a drinking contest with some of the villagers, looking stoic even as he put away enough alcohol to fell a bear. He watched the blonde cook, Sanji, swooning over every woman in sight, especially Nami and her sister, Nojiko, presenting them with elaborately prepared food. He watched the long-nosed one, Usopp, tell a group of enraptured children a wildly exaggerated tale of the battle they had all just witnessed, in which he, of course, had played a pivotal, heroic role. They were a strange, chaotic, dysfunctional group, but they were a unit, a family. He could feel the bonds between them, invisible threads of loyalty and affection. It made his chest ache with a familiar pang of loss. He remembered Team 7, the Sannin, the entire allied shinobi forces. He remembered the feeling of belonging, of having a place. Now, he was an anomaly, a foreigner in a world that felt fundamentally alien. He'd tried to sense for a familiar chakra signature, for Kakashi, for Sakura, for anyone. There was nothing. The energy here was different, the people were different, the very sea and sky felt different. The fusion with Kurama was the strangest part. He felt the fox's power, amplified 1,000-fold, coiled within him. It was no longer a tenant in his soul, but the very foundation of the house. A devil fruit, they'd called it, a mythical zone, something about a Kitsune no Mi model, Kyubi no Okami. The names meant nothing to him. All he knew was that it was his power now, bone deep and instinctual. And it had made him a beacon, a lighthouse of unnatural energy in a world that wasn't his. You're not eating. He looked up. It was the girl, Nami. She had changed out of her torn, muddy clothes into a simple skirt and shirt. Her wet orange hair was combed out, and the horrifying tattoo of Arlong's symbol was covered by a clean white bandage. She held 2 mugs of what smelled like ale. She offered one to him. He took it, their fingers brushing. Her hand was warm, not very hungry. She sat down on the step beside him, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her. But not so close as to be intrusive. She followed his gaze to the party. It's a lot, I know, she said, her voice soft. They haven't had a reason to celebrate in a long time. Because of you. I just took out the trash, he said, echoing a phrase he'd heard from an old, white-haired teacher long ago. It felt hollow on his tongue. You call that taking out the trash? She gave a short, slightly hysterical laugh. You were, I don't know what you were. I've never seen anything like that. That power, it's not normal. I'm not normal, he admitted, swirling the ale in his mug. They sat in silence for a moment, the sounds of the party washing over them. It wasn't an awkward silence. It was comfortable, shared. Thank you, she said finally, her voice barely a whisper. I know I said it before, but you didn't just save my life. You gave me my life back. You gave this whole village its soul back. I can never repay you for that. There's nothing to repay, he said, looking at her. Her eyes, a warm, whiskey brown, were red-rimmed from her earlier tears, but they were clear now. Clear and fiercely intelligent. No one should have to live like that. No, she agreed. They shouldn't. She took a sip of her drink. So, Naruto, where are you from? Luffy wants you to join us, but You don't seem like the pirate type. You don't even know what they are. He looked out at the ocean, a vast, endless expanse of dark water under a sea of unfamiliar stars. The constellations were all wrong. I'm from a place that's very far away. I was in a fight. A big one. And I think I lost my way home. The understatement was so massive it was almost a lie, but it was the closest to the truth he could manage. Nami's sharp eyes caught the flicker of pain in his. She was a master of reading people. A skill honed by years of deception and survival. She saw past the immense power, past the calm exterior, and saw the lost young man beneath. You're alone, she stated. It wasn't a question. He didn't answer. He just took a long drink from his mug. The taste was bitter and foreign. Well, she said, a new resolve in her voice. You're not anymore. You're with us, for now. And we're heading for the Grand Line. The Grand Line. It's the craziest, most dangerous stretch of sea in the world. A pirate's graveyard, she explained, a hint of excitement in her voice. Luffy's heading there to find the One Piece and become king of the pirates. Zoro wants to become the world's greatest swordsman. Sanji is looking for a legendary sea called the All Blue. Usopp P. wants to be a brave warrior of the sea. She smiled fondly. They're a bunch of idiots with impossible dreams. And you? Naruto asked, genuinely curious. What's your dream? Nami's smile widened, and for the first time, it was a real, unburdened smile. It lit up her face, and Naruto felt a strange warmth spread through his chest. Me, she said, her eyes shining. I'm a navigator. My dream is to travel all the seas of the world, and draw a map of the entire thing. He looked at her, at the passion and ambition burning in her eyes. A map of the entire world. It was a goal born not of conquest or power, but of curiosity and a desire to understand the world, to chart it, to make it known. It was, in its own way, as grand as wanting to be Hokage. That's a good dream, he said, and he meant it. He raised his mug. To your map, quote. She clinked her mug against his, her smile softening. And to you finding your way home. They drank. In that moment, sitting on a step in a village he'd never heard of, in a world he didn't know. With a girl whose dream was to map it, Naruto felt the crushing weight of his solitude lift, just a little. It was the first time he had felt something other than loss and confusion since he'd arrived. It felt nice. Far away, in the calm, sterile halls of a fortress hidden within the Grand Line, the air was cold and still. This was no common marine base. There were no shouts, no rowdy soldiers. There were only whispers, hushed footsteps on marble floors, and the quiet hum of technology that was centuries ahead of its time. This was a place that did not officially exist. In a circular chamber, its walls dark and featureless, a single man stood before a vast, three-dimensional chart of the world, projected in soft blue light. The man, Inquisitor Valerius, was dressed in the immaculate white and gold uniform of an organization so secret, its name was a death sentence to speak. His face was sharp and aristocratic, framed by short, silver hair, and his eyes were the color of cold steel. He projected an aura of absolute, unwavering conviction. An adjutant, his face pale and sweating despite the cold, hurried into the room, holding a data slate. He approached Valerius but kept a respectful distance of 10 feet. Inquisitor, the adjutant said, his voice trembling slightly. It's confirmed. Valerius did not turn. His eyes remained fixed on the East Blue section of the map. Report. The energy signature spike from East Blue, grid 7 to 7 beta. The one that overloaded the G5 listening post. We cross-referenced the energy profile with the Amu archives. The resonance, it's a 99.7% match. Valerius's posture remained unchanged, but a stillness came over him, the focused silence of a predator that has caught its prey's scent. A match to which codex? The adjutant swallowed hard, as if the words themselves were dangerous. CODEX-9. The mythical zone. Kitsune no Mi. Model. QB no Okami. He paused, then added, the fox god, fruit. We believed it to be a myth. A fabrication from the void century. Myths are just truths we have forgotten how to read, Valerius said, his voice a flat, cold line. Location. The Konami Islands. Specifically, Kokoyashi Village. Local reports are chaotic, but they speak of the sudden, total defeat of the Arlong pirates. They describe a golden god and a nine-tailed monster. The adjutant's hand shook as he held the slate. Sir, the last time a god tier fruit of this magnitude manifested spontaneously was when Oro's island was erased from the map, Valerius finished. His voice dropping to a near whisper. For a fleeting, imperceptible moment, a flicker of an old, deep pain crossed his features, the memory of fire and a sky filled with screaming. He crushed it instantly, his face becoming a cold, implacable mask once more. These fruits were not gifts. They were apocalypses waiting to happen. They were imbalances in the fabric of the world, and it was his sacred duty to restore that balance. He turned slowly, his steel-gray eyes fixing on his subordinate. The adjutant flinched under the weight of his gaze. So, after all these centuries, Valerius mused, a chilling absence of emotion in his tone. The ninth has reappeared. He walked to his desk, a single slab of polished black obsidian. He looked at the report, at the energy signature that blushed like a star in the otherwise mundane readings from East Blue. This was not a pirate to be captured or a revolutionary to be suppressed. This was a force to be excised. A holy duty. His finger tap. The commendation to deploy his purifiers. Found. Chapter 1 end. Chapter 2. The price of a dream. The Going Merry cut through the waves of the East Blue, a creature of wood and joyous defiance. The scent of salt and freedom was intoxicating, a perfume Nami had only ever dreamed of. For 8 years, the sea had been a boundary, the edge of her cage. Now, it was a road, stretching out to an infinite horizon. And every league they sailed was a victory. She stood at the ship's rail, letting the spray kiss her face, the simple, cheerful bleating of the sheep figurehead a constant, happy companion. Behind her, the ship was alive with a boisterous energy it had never known. Luffy was attempting to fish, by stretching his rubber arm deep into the water, occasionally shouting in surprise when something nibbled him. Usopp was carving a new, more elaborate slingshot, occasionally pausing to regale Luffy with a tale of his 8,000 followers, who would surely miss his leadership. Sanji was in his new, fully stocked galley. The clatter of pans and the divine smell of simmering spices a promise of a feast to come. Zoro was asleep, propped against the mast, a trio of swords resting beside him like loyal dogs. And then there was Naruto. He wasn't loud, he wasn't sleeping, he was simply present. He'd spent the first day on the ship in a state of quiet observation, moving with a silent economy that was both unnerving and deeply reassuring. He learned the names and functions of the ropes with a single explanation, his memory seemingly photographic. When a sudden squall had blown in, he'd been up the mast securing a loose sail before Nami had even finished shouting the order, moving with the preternatural agility of a cat. He carried an aura of profound competence. It was in the way he stood, balanced perfectly against the pitch and roll of the ship, in the way his gaze constantly swept the horizon, not with a tourist's wonder, but with a soldier's vigilance. Nami, a connoisseur of survival, recognized it for what it was, the ingrained instinct of someone who had lived their life in a state of perpetual high alert. He was a weapon at rest, and his presence on their small ship made her feel safer than she had in her entire life. It also terrified her. She found herself watching him. He'd claimed a spot near the stern, sitting with his back against the railing, sharpening a wicked-looking three-pronged knife, a kunai, he'd called it, with a whetstone he'd produced from a sealed pouch on his hip. His movements were practiced and hypnotic. He seemed lost in the task, but she knew he was aware of everything. A pod of dolphins surfaced 100 yards off the port bow, and his eyes flicked toward them for a bare instant before returning to his work, his senses impossibly keen. That night, she took the helm for the midnight watch. The sea was calm, a vast expanse of shimmering black silk under a blanket of alien stars. The constellations were all wrong, a disorienting detail that had bothered her since they'd left the Konami Islands. It was another reminder of just how vast and unknown the world truly was. Footsteps, soft as a cat's, approached from behind. She didn't need to turn. Couldn't sleep, she asked, her eyes on the compass. Old habits. Naruto's voice was a low rumble beside her. He leaned against the railing, his silhouette dark against the starlit water. You get used to watching the dark. Me too, she admitted. For years, she had slept with one eye open, listening for the heavy tread of fishmen coming to collect, to punish, to remind her of her place. They stood in a comfortable silence, the only sounds the creak of the ship's timbers and the gentle lapping of waves against the hull. "I heard you," he said, his voice soft. "Back at the village, when you asked Luffy for help." Nami's hands tightened on the helm. She remembered the moment with a burning, visceral clarity, the shame, the desperation, the final, shattering surrender. "You said he couldn't understand what it was like to be bound by a promise," Naruto continued, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "To have your life stolen. He couldn't," she said, her voice tight. "He's free. He's the freest person I've ever met. He wouldn't get it. I do." The words were so simple, so quiet, they almost got lost in the sound of the sea. Nami turned to look at him properly. In the faint starlight, she could see his expression was distant, haunted by a memory she couldn't begin to imagine. "My dream was to be the leader of my village," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "The Hokage. It was the only thing I ever wanted. It meant being seen, being acknowledged, being loved by everyone who had ever shunned me." He paused, a humorless smile touching his lips. "I got it. For a little while, anyway. I got the acknowledgement. I became the hero. And the price was everything. Everyone. The great war one told you about, we won. And in the very last moments of that victory, I lost my world." Nami's heart ached for him. He wasn't just a god of destruction, he was a king who had lost his kingdom. A hero with no one left to save. "So you see," he said, turning his piercing blue eyes on her. "I know the price of a dream. And I know what it feels like to have it all turn to ash." He looked at her, his gaze softening. "But you got your dream back. Your map of the world. You're just getting started." Tears pricked at her eyes, and she turned away quickly, focusing on the dark water ahead. "It feels fragile, like I'm going to wake up and still be in that room, drawing charts for him." "You won't," Naruto said with absolute certainty. "I won't let you." The conviction in his voice was a physical force. It wasn't a boast, it was a vow, as solid and real as the deck beneath her feet. She believed him, and that feeling, that simple, unshakable belief, was more intoxicating than any ale. "Get some rest, navigator," he said softly. "I'll keep watch." Logatown smelled of history, ozone, and fried food. It was a bustling, energetic place, a city living in the shadow of a legend. This was the town where the pirate king, Gold Roger, had been born and where he had died. His final words kicking off the great pirate era. As soon as they docked, Luffy was vibrating with excitement. "The execution platform. I gotta see it. I need swords," Zoro grunted, already scanning the streets. "My katanas are chipped, and I shall survey the local sea life. For culinary purposes, of course," Sanji declared, a heart already forming in his eye as he spotted a group of women. The crew scattered, leaving Nami and Naruto standing on the docks. "I'm going to hit the shops," Nami said, adjusting the strap of her bag. "I need some new clothes, maybe some better cartography tools." She looked at Naruto. "What about you?" He shrugged, hands shoved in the pockets of his new black pants and a simple orange shirt Sanji had lent him. "I'll just look around." "All right. Don't get lost," she said, then hesitated. "And try not to destroy anything." He gave her a small, lopsided grin, a rare flash of the boy he might have been. "I'll do my best." Naruto wandered. He drifted through the crowded market, a silent observer in a sea of noise. The energy of the place was a chaotic symphony to his heightened senses. He could feel the greed of the merchants, the hope of the rookie pirates, the weary cynicism of the townsfolk who had seen it all before. He could feel the weight of history that clung to the central square, a lingering echo of a massive crowd and a single man's defiant smile. His steps led him there, to the execution platform. It was old and weathered, yet it dominated the square. He saw Luffy clambering up it, a foolish grin on his face. Naruto felt a prickle of unease. The air here was heavy, not just with history, but with a simmering tension. He could feel dozens of strong-willed individuals converging on this spot. A clown-faced man with a grudge, a large woman with a club, and something else, something cold and smoky and authoritative. He stayed in the crowd, watching from a distance, content to let Luffy have his fun. Then things went sideways, as they so often seemed to do around the boy in the straw hat. The clown, Buggy, had Luffy trapped in the stocks on the platform. The sky darkened with unnatural speed, the wind picking up. And then he saw the Marines. They were led by a man with stark white hair, a thick cigar clamped in his jaw, and a pair of jeets strapped to his back. The man's eyes were like flint, and he radiated an aura of dogged, unyielding authority. Naruto felt the strange energy of a devil fruit from him, something intangible and fluid, like smoke. "Captain Smoker," someone in the crowd whispered in terror. "We have to get out of here." The Marine captain, Smoker, was focused entirely on the platform, on Luffy. His men were fanning out, creating a perimeter. There was no escape. Zoro and Sanji appeared at the edge of the square, their expressions grim as they saw their captain's predicament. They were too far away. Buggy raised his sword over Luffy's neck. "This is it, Straw Hat. Any last words?" Luffy, trapped in seconds from death, threw his head back and grinned the biggest, most joyful grin Naruto had ever seen. "I'm the man who's going to be king of the pirates." Naruto's breath caught in his chest. The declaration, so absurd, so impossible, was made with such utter, unshakable belief that it bent the world around it. This boy, he was just like him. A fool with an unbreakable dream. A bolt of lightning, impossibly bright, tore from the heavens and struck the platform. It wasn't one of Naruto's attacks. It was nature itself, a 1 in a billion chance, an act of God or fate. The platform exploded into splinters. In the ensuing chaos, Luffy was free. Zoro and Sanji moved to intercept him, to get him to the port. But Smoker was faster. He wasn't running. His lower body had dissolved into a plume of thick white smoke, propelling him forward at incredible speed. "You're not getting away, Straw Hat," Smoker snarled, his arm dematerializing into a tendril of smoke that shot toward Luffy. He would have caught him. The crew would have been captured, right here, at the very entrance to the Grand Line. But Naruto was moving. He wasn't a blur of yellow light like Minato. He wasn't a streak of orange. He simply was no longer where he had been. He appeared in the space between Smoker and the fleeing Straw Hats, not with a flashy teleportation, but with a single, impossibly fast streak. EP that his legs shouldn't have been able to make. He didn't draw his kunai. He didn't enter a fighting stance. He just stood there, his back to his friends, his hands in his pockets. Smoker's smoke arm reformed into a fist, but it stopped inches from Naruto's face. The Marine captain's eyes widened, his cigar falling from his lips. He was trying to push forward, but he couldn't. It felt like he was pushing against a mountain. Naruto hadn't moved a muscle, but the air around him had turned to lead. A pressure, immense and invisible, radiated from him in a suffocating wave. It wasn't hockey. Smoker knew what hockey felt like. This was something else, something older. It felt divine, primordial. It was a pressure that didn't just target the will, it targeted the very essence of a being. Smoker felt a primal, instinctual terror that he hadn't felt since he was a child. His devil fruit power, his ability to become intangible smoke, felt fragile. The smoke around his legs flickered, struggling to maintain its form under the sheer weight of Naruto's presence. "Let them go," Naruto said. His voice was quiet, almost conversational, but it echoed in the sudden silence of the square. It was not a request. It was a command. Smoker gritted his teeth, sweat beading on his forehead. Every instinct in his body was screaming at him. Danger. Anomaly. Threat level indeterminate. This man, this blonde D-man was more dangerous than anyone he had ever faced in the East Blue. More dangerous than Arlong. More dangerous, perhaps, than the warlords he'd read about. He had a choice. Press the attack against this unknown, terrifying power and risk everything, or focus on his primary target, Straw Hat, who was getting further away with every passing second. Before he could decide, a sudden, powerful gust of wind, green and smelling of storms, swept through the square, kicking up dust and debris. It was an unnatural wind, and it provided the perfect cover. By the time it died down, Naruto and the Straw Hats were gone. Smoker stood there, his body slowly reforming, his heart pounding in his chest. He looked in the direction they had fled, then at the spot where the blonde man had stood. A subordinate ran up to him. "Captain, they're heading for the port." Should we pursue? Smoker took a deep breath, the phantom pressure still making his skin crawl. All units, to the harbor. Do not let them escape. He roared. But as he ran, his mind wasn't on the boy in the straw hat. It was on the quiet, blond man with the eyes of a deep ocean and the presence of a god. He had to know who he was. Aegis W. As a name spoken only in the most secret of circles, a silent fortress carved into the heart of a barren, storm-shrouded mountain on the Grand Line. Its halls were sterile white, its air filtered and cold. The only sound the near inaudible hum of its advanced systems. This was the headquarters of the Sanctorum, the world government's ultimate failsafe. In the central briefing chamber, Inquisitor V. Alarius stood before a holographic display. 5 figures knelt before him. They were his purifiers, the elite of the elite, each one a master of a specific form of combat, their loyalty to him absolute. The target has been designated. Kitsune, Valerius said, his voice echoing slightly in the cold, cavernous room. He is the wielder of the Kitsune no Mi, model, Kyubi no Okami. A mythical zone, god tier. We have a positive identification of his presence in Logatown, East Blue. A large, heavily armored man, his face a mass of scar tissue, grunted. A god tier fruit, sir. In the East Blue. It seems unlikely. This was Colossus, his team's heavy weapons and demolitions expert. Unlikely, yes. But the energy readings are undeniable, Valerius countered, his tone leaving no room for argument. He has allied himself with a rookie pirate crew, the Straw Hats. They are en route to the Grand Line as we speak. A lithe woman shrouded in gray, her face hidden by shadows, spoke, her voice a dry whisper. Does the anomaly have control, Inquisitor? This was Whisper, the team's assassin and infiltration specialist. Partial control, Valerius answered. He manifested 3 tails during the Arlong Park incident. But the sheer energy output, even in that limited state, was catastrophic for the opposing force. He is learning, and that is what makes him so dangerous. Every day, his bond with the fruit deepens. Every day, the potential for an uncontrolled manifestation event increases. He gestured, and the holographic display flickered, replaced by a grainy, silent, black and white video. It showed a small, peaceful-looking island with a town nestled by a bay. 80 years ago, Valerius said, his voice dropping, the Nako no Mi, model, Sphinx, another theoretical god tier, was consumed by a common baker on the island of Oros in the New World. The footage shifted. It showed a man, his form indistinct and wreathed in a chaotic, swirling aura of sand and light. He was thrashing, screaming silently at the camera, his body twisting and reshaping itself. He had no training, no willpower to command it. The fruits divine will overwhelmed his mortal mind. He lost control. On the screen, the figure swelled. It lost all human shape, becoming a colossal beast of myth, a lion-headed creature with wings of pure solar fire. It opened its mouth, and a wave of incandescent energy erupted. Silent and absolute, the video feed dissolved into static. The Oros event, Valerius said, his voice as cold as a tomb. The island and its 50,000 inhabitants were incinerated. Wiped from the map, the world government covered it up, calling it a natural disaster. But we of the Sanctorum know the truth. He turned off the display, plunging the room into semi-darkness. The only light the cold glow from the control panels. These fruits are not a gift. They are a curse. They are divine parasites that offer ultimate power at the cost of one's humanity. They are a fundamental threat to the balance of the world. Our sacred mission is to find these anomalies and excise them before they can reach the uncontrolled manifestation stage. He looked at each of his purifiers, his steel-gray eyes boring into them. This Kitsune is the most powerful signature we have ever recorded. More so than the Sphinx. More than any of the others in our codex. We cannot allow another Oros. We will hunt him. We will isolate him. And we will purify him. For the good of the world. He walked over to the silent recording. With a flick of his finger, he froze it on the last clear frame, the peaceful town of Oros. Nestled by the bay, in the foreground, a small fishing boat was pulling away from the shore. And on that boat, a small, silver-haired boy was visible, looking back at his home, his face a mask of pure, uncomprehending terror. Valerius stared at the image of his younger self for a long, cold moment. This was not a job. It was a crusade. The ascent of Reverse Mountain was a suicidal, exhilarating madness. The Going Merry was caught in the current, flung up the mountain river against all laws of physics. Luffy, Usopp, and Sanji whooped with delight. Zoro looked grimly determined. Nami screamed instructions, her knuckles white on the helm. Naruto stood at the prow, a living anchor. The pressure of the water and the sheer chaotic energy of the Grand Line's entrance was a buffet for his senses. He could feel the four major ocean currents converging beneath them, a nexus of power that made the very air crackle. Before they had entered the current, they had performed a small ritual. Nami had explained that pirates would put their feet on a barrel and declare their dreams before braving the Grand Line. Luffy, of course, went first. "I'm gonna be king of the pirates." Zoro followed. The world's greatest swordsman, Usopp, with theatrical bravado. A brave warrior of the sea, Sanji, with a dreamy look. To find the all blue. Nami, her voice clear and strong. To draw a map of the world. All eyes turned to Naruto. He walked to the barrel, his expression unreadable. He had no impossible dream to chase anymore. His dream had been achieved and then burned to the ground. What was left? He put his foot on the barrel, his gaze sweeping over the faces of this strange, chaotic family he had fallen into. Luffy's boundless optimism, Zoro's quiet strength, Sanji's fiery passion, Usopp's terrified courage, and Nami, her fierce, brilliant hope. They had taken him in without question. They had given him a place. "To protect my friends," he said, his voice quiet but firm. A silence fell over the crew. It was so different from their own grand, selfish ambitions. It was simpler, deeper. Nami looked at him, her heart doing a strange little flutter. He wasn't looking for a treasure or a title. He was looking for a purpose. And he had just found it in them. Now, at the crest of the mountain, the world opened up. The Grand Line, a vast, endless sea stretching out before them. A line of impossible clouds and a sky that felt bigger than it had any right to be. They had made it. Their celebratory shouts were cut short by the sight of a mountain-sized whale blocking their path. Laboon. The ensuing chaos involved cannonballs, a painted smiley face, and Luffy getting swallowed whole. For Naruto, it was another exercise in bemused observation. He could feel the whale's immense, ancient sorrow, a grief that had lasted for 50 years. He understood, in a way the others couldn't, the depth of its loyalty. This led them to Whiskey Peak, an island of CTUS-shaped mountains under a perpetual night sky. The town at its base was absurdly welcoming, a party already in full swing for their arrival. Banners proclaimed, "Welcome, heroes." Music played. Food and drink were offered freely. It was a lie. Naruto felt it the moment he stepped off the ship. The smiles were too wide, the laughter too loud. Beneath the surface of forced revelry was a current of cold, predatory intent. It was like walking into a nest of placid-looking snakes. He could feel the concealed weapons, the controlled breathing of trained killers pretending to be jovial townsfolk. Luffy, Usopp, and Sanji, of course, dove in headfirst. Even Zoro, after a challenge from the town's leader, Agarippoi, was drawn into a drinking contest. Only Nami seemed to share his suspicion, though she played along. A calculating glint in her eye as she negotiated a price for their protection. Naruto accepted a mug of ale but didn't drink. He found a quiet spot in the shadows, his senses spread out like a net. He felt the life signs of his crewmates as they ate and drank themselves into oblivion. He felt Nami and the town leader slip away to a side room, her feigning drunkenness. He listened to their conversation not with his ears, but by sensing the vibrations in the air, the subtle fluctuations of their intent. Bounty hunters. The entire town. Baroque works. 100 of them. Iting for the pirates to pass out before killing them and taking their bounty. He was about to intervene when he felt another presence. Awake, alert, and armed. Zoro. The swordsman was sitting against a building, feigning sleep. But Naruto could feel the focused calm of a warrior waiting for a battle to begin. Good. He wasn't alone. The party wound down. The straw hats were carried to a guest house, snoring. The townsfolk dispersed, their fake smiles dropping, replaced by predatory grins. They began to draw their weapons. Naruto melted out of his shadowed corner, moving with a silence that defied the gravel on the ground. He appeared beside Zoro, who opened one eye. You noticed too, Zoro grunted. It wasn't a question. 100 of them, Naruto said, his voice a low whisper. All focused on us. Zoro grinned. A feral, bloodthirsty thing. 100. That's all. Let's see who can take down more. Don't kill them if you don't have to, Naruto said, a note of command in his voice. We don't need the attention. You take the fun out of everything, Zoro grumbled, but he didn't argue. He rose to his feet, drawing Wado Ikimonji. From a nearby rooftop, a woman with a strange hairstyle and a blue-haired man watched through binoculars. Miss Wednesday and Mr. Nine, they're waking up. All agents, prepare to attack. What happened next was not a battle. It was a harvest. Before the fur, Saint Bounty Hunter could even shout a war cry, Naruto was among them. He moved through the darkened streets like a phantom. A flash of movement in the periphery. A precise chop to the back of a neck. A jab of 2 fingers into a pressure point on a man's temple. A leg sweep that took out 3 men at once. Each movement was fluid, economical, and utterly disabling. There were no wasted steps, no flashy techniques. It was the brutal, efficient work of a shinobi, a professional dismantling amateurs. Zoro, by contrast, was a whirlwind of steel. He wasn't as silent, but he was just as deadly. He used the backs of his blades, as requested. The sound of sword hilts cracking against skulls and jaws providing a percussive rhythm to the night. He fought with a joyous ferocity, a dancer in a deadly ballet. Nami, who had been pretending to be asleep in the guest house, watched from the window, her jaw slack. She had seen Naruto's divine, overwhelming power at Arlong Park. This was different. This was not the power of a god. This was the skill of a master. The precision, the speed, the quiet, terrifying competence, it was a different kind of strength. It wasn't about incinerating your enemies with golden light. It was about being so much better than them that they never even stood a chance. He and Zoro moved in a macabre harmony, the ghost and the demon, clearing the town square in under 2 minutes. By the time Miss Monday, a large, muscular woman, swung a log at Zoro, most of her compatriots were already unconscious. Zoro dealt with her, and then the only ones left standing were Agaram, disguised as Agarapoy, Miss Wednesday, and Mr. Nine. Naruto reappeared, dusting off his hands, not a single speck of dirt on his clothes. He looked at the terrified trio. The party's over. Nami stepped out of the guest house, a smirk on her face. Looks like you boys had some fun without me. Her eyes, however, were on Naruto. The respect she'd felt before was now something deeper, more complex. The man was a paradox. A lonely god with the skills of a deadly assassin. A quiet, gentle soul who could command the battlefield with a whisper. He was the most dangerous and the safest man she had ever met. And he was on her side. The thought sent a thrill down her spine that had nothing to do with fear. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. An oasis of trust. The desert was a living entity, vast and merciless. By day, the sun was a hammer, beating down with a white-hot intensity that warped the air and baked the endless dunes into a shimmering, hostile landscape. By night, it was a realm of profound cold, the temperature plummeting with a startling swiftness, the star-dusted sky offering no warmth. For the Straw Hat Pirates, trekking across the Alabasta Desert was a special kind of hell. Luffy and Usopp were draped over the back of a giant, eyelash-bedecked camel, moaning dramatically about dehydration. Sanji, despite the heat, was impeccably dressed and trying to ration their dwindling water supply. A task made nearly impossible by their captain. Zoro trudged on, his usual stoicism a mask for the weary droop of his shoulders. Nami, her skin slick with sweat under her light desert robes, kept her eyes on the horizon. Her navigator's instincts screaming at the featureless landscape. They were following a vivre card, a magical slip of paper pointing toward their friend, Vivi, the princess of this dying kingdom. But even with the magical guide, the sheer oppressive scale of the desert was beginning to wear on them. Only one member of their crew seemed unaffected. Naruto walked with a steady, unhurried pace, his breathing even. His expression calm. The blistering sun didn't seem to faze him. He hadn't asked for water once. He moved through the inferno as if it were a pleasant spring day, his senses extended. A silent guardian watching over his flagging comrades. He could feel it all. The life force of the desert creatures burrowed deep beneath the sand. The whisper of the wind carrying scents of distant, brackish water. And something else. A sickness. He could feel the thirst of the land itself, a deep, foundational wrongness that permeated the very earth. Alabasta was dying of thirst, and it wasn't natural. Vivi, walking beside Nami, looked haunted. "It's Crocodile," she said, her voice raspy. "He's been using dance powder to steal the rain from every city except Alubarna, where he's based. He's framed my father, the king, and turned the people against him. The rebel army, led by my childhood friend, Koza, is marching on the capital. They think the king stole their water. It's all a lie, a country-wide deception to allow Crocodile to seize control. So we just need to get to Alubarna, kick this crocodile guy's ass, and tell everyone the truth," Luffy said from his camel perch. His voice weak but determined. "It's not that simple, Luffy," Vivi sighed. "The entire country is a powder keg. A single misstep could plunge us into a civil war that will kill hundreds of thousands. And there's another problem," a new voice said. A man in a flamboyant swan-themed coat and painted face, formerly the Baroque Works agent Mr. Chu Bon Clay, had joined them after a bizarre encounter. He was now an unlikely, and surprisingly loyal, ally. Crocodile is one of the 7 warlords of the sea. He's a monster. He ate the Suna Suna no Mi. The sand fruit. You can't touch him. Your attacks will just pass right through his body." Zoro's eyes narrowed. A Logia user. Sanji lit a cigarette, the flame seeming to struggle in the dry air. "That complicates things." Naruto listened, his gaze sweeping over the dunes. Sand. A man made of sand. He thought of Gaara, of Shukaku. He knew sand. He knew its weaknesses. But he kept silent, filing the information away. His role, for now, was to get them there. Their journey led them to Yuba, a once thriving oasis town that was now nothing more than a collection of dusty, half-buried buildings. Here they found an old man, Toto, Koza's father, stubbornly digging in the dry sand, refusing to abandon his home. He told them the rebel army had already moved on, marching toward Cateria. "I promised my son I would protect this city," the old man rasped, his voice raw with grief and effort. "There is still water deep beneath the sand. This oasis is not dead." That night, the cold was a physical thing. Luffy, determined to help the old man, dug alongside him until he collapsed from exhaustion. The crew huddled around a small, sputtering fire, the mood grim. Nami found Naruto standing at the edge of the ruined oasis, looking out into the darkness. The wind whipped his blonde hair around his face, and in the faint starlight, he looked like a statue, a lonely sentinel guarding a dead city. "You can feel it too, can't you?" she asked, coming to stand beside him. "The lie," he said, his voice low. "This place, it isn't just dry. It's being choked. The life force of the water, it's not gone. It's just suppressed, caged." Nami shivered, though not from the cold. The way he talked about the world, as if he could feel its heartbeat, its pain, was still deeply unnerving. "Crocodile," she whispered. He nodded. "This is more than just stealing rain. This is a corruption of the land itself. A man like that, he can't be allowed to have this kind in his hands." There was a cold finality in his tone that made the hairs on her arms stand up. She watched Luffy sleeping fitfully near the fire, his face streaked with dirt, his body pushed to its limit for the sake of a stranger's stubborn hope. "Luffy is so simple," she mused. "He sees someone in trouble, and he helps. He sees a bad guy, and he punches him. He doesn't think about politics or consequences." "That's not simplicity," Naruto corrected gently. "It's clarity. He sees the heart of the problem. Everything else is just noise." He looked over at their sleeping captain. "It's a rare kind of strength." Naruto knelt, placing his palm flat against the dry, cracked earth. He closed his eyes. Nami watched, fascinated. She saw no golden glow, no overt display of power. But she felt a change in the air, a subtle shift in pressure, as if the space around him had become focused, concentrated. He was silent for a long minute. Then his eyes snapped open. "He's right," he said, a note of wonder in his voice. "The old man. There's water. Deep. A massive aquifer, miles beneath us. It's fighting to get to the surface." He stood up and looked toward the east, toward the distant, unseen capital of Alubarna. "And the source of the suppression, the chokehold on all the water in this land, it's coming from there. He turned to Nami, his blue eyes intense. Crocodile isn't just a warlord. He's the sickness. Alubarna was a city under siege from its own people. The royal army stood grimly on the battlements, facing down the rebel army across a vast, dusty plain. The standoff was tense, a single spark away from erupting into a full-scale massacre. The Straw Hats' plan, concocted in a desperate rush, was to split up. Luffy, having already had one disastrous encounter with Crocodile where he was left impaled and dying in the desert, only saved by a mist. Arius Woman was now hell-bent on finding the warlord for a rematch. The others were tasked with finding the bomb. Vivi had received a terrifying piece of intelligence. Crocodile had planted a massive bomb somewhere in the city's main square, powerful enough to wipe out everyone, rebel and royal alike. It was set to go off at the climax of the battle, a final, brutal move to annihilate all his opposition and leave him as the sole savior of a grieving, shattered nation. Chaos reigned. The Baroque Works officer agents were scattered throughout the city, engaging the Straw Hats one by one. Zoro was locked in a deadly duel with the steel-bodied Mr. 1. Sanji faced the flamboyant and deadly Mr. 2. Nami and Usopp were tangled up with the more bizarre, but no less dangerous, lower-ranked agents. Naruto moved through the city like a ghost. He wasn't interested in the duels. His focus was singular. The bomb. He stood on a high rooftop overlooking the Grand Plaza. It was a sea of people, a mile strong of confusion and rising panic as the fighting began to spill into the streets. The bomb could be anywhere. Under a cart, in a clock tower, beneath a fountain. It was an impossible task. Vivi was frantically trying to get to the palace to warn her father, to stop the armies, but she was being harried at every turn. Time was running out. The smell of blood and desperation was thick in the air. Naruto, can you hear me? Nami's voice crackled through the small transponder snail Sanji had given them. We can't find it. The clock tower was a decoy. We don't know where to look. Naruto closed his eyes, shutting out the chaos. The screams, the clang of steel. He pushed aside the surface noise and listened. He listened with the senses his strange, divine fruit had given him. He didn't search for gunpowder or a fuse. He searched for the wrongness, the sickness. He had learned that all things had a natural energy, a life force. Even inanimate objects. A rock had the energy of the earth. A sword had the energy of the steel and the will of its wielder. A bomb of that magnitude, an instrument of pure, indiscriminate destruction, would have an aura that was a void, a cancerous black hole in the natural flow of the world. He let his senses expand, sweeping over the plaza like a wave. He felt the frantic, fearful energy of the crowd. He felt the stubborn, loyal energy of the royal guards. He felt the desperate, righteous anger of the rebels. It was a cacophony. Then he found it. It wasn't in the clock tower. It wasn't in a building. It was right in the open, in the very center of the plaza. A large, ornate cannon, set up as if for a celebration. To his normal sight, it was just a piece of artillery. To his divine senses, it was a vortex of pure, nihilistic intent. A screaming void of death. I found it, he said into the transponder, his voice calm and clear amidst the rising panic. The central plaza. It's the large cannon on the main dais. Are you sure? Usopp's panicked voice came back. We checked that. It just looks like an old ceremonial cannon. I'm sure, Naruto said with an unnerving certainty that cut through Usopp's doubt. Trust me. He didn't wait for a reply. He leapt from the rooftop. His body cloaked in a flicker of golden energy to soften his landing. He hit the ground running, a blonde streak moving against the tide of the terrified crowd. People scrambled out of his way. Not because he pushed them, but because the sheer force of his will, his focused intent, parted the sea of humanity before him. He reached the dais just as Zoro, bleeding owned dozens of cuts but victorious over Mr. 1, arrived from one side, and Sanji, bruised but triumphant, arrived from the other. Naruto, what's the plan? Sanji called out, flicking ash from his cigarette. The rebels are about to breach the main gate, Zoro grunted, wiping blood from his chin with the back of his hand. This whole place is going to blow any second. Naruto vaulted onto the dais and placed a hand on the cannon. The feeling was nauseating. A cold, dead hunger emanated from the metal. He could feel the complex mechanism inside, a timer counting down the last 90 seconds. He could try to disable it, but his knowledge of this world's technology was limited. A wrong move could set it off prematurely. He could try to contain the blast with his own power, but doing so in the middle of a packed city square was risky. The bleed-off energy alone could kill hundreds. He needed to move it. All of it. Zoro, Sanji, he said, his voice ringing with command. Clear a path. Straight up. They didn't understand, but they heard the authority in his voice. They trusted him. You heard him. Sanji yelled. Everyone get back. Zoro didn't waste words. He pointed his sword skyward. Three-sword style. Dragon Twister. He began to spin, generating a ferocious vortex of wind and cutting power that shot straight up into the sky, shredding the awnings and banners above them and creating a clear, circular opening to the heavens. Naruto placed both hands on the massive cannon. It had to weigh several tons. He took a deep breath, and for the first time in Alabasta, he let his power flow. It wasn't the terrifying eruption of Arlong Park. It was controlled, focused. A brilliant golden aura, like a miniature sun, enveloped him. 5 ethereal tails, shimmering and translucent, bloomed from his back, wrapping around the body of the cannon, their energy sinking into the metal. He wasn't just lifting it, he was infusing it, controlling it, making it an extension of his own will. With a deep, guttural roar of effort, he lifted. The crowd, which had been surging and screaming, fell into a sudden, shocked silence. In the center of the plaza, the man who had been a ghost for most of the battle was now a blazing golden god, effortlessly hoisting a multi-ton cannon over his head. The sight was so profoundly impossible, so utterly beyond the realm of comprehension, that it stopped the battle in its tracks. Rebel and royal soldier alike stared, their weapons forgotten, their mouths agape. Naruto bent his knees, his muscles bunching. With a final, explosive shout, he threw the cannon. It didn't just fly, it rocketed. Propelled by the golden energy of his tails, a gleaming projectile streaking into the sky through the hole Zoro had created. It climbed higher and higher, 1,000 feet, 2,000, 5,000. Until it was just a tiny speck against the blue. Then, it detonated, a silent, blinding flash of white light. A moment later, the sound hit them, a deafening, cataclysmic boom that shook the entire city. A wave of heat washed over the plaza, but it was too high up to be dangerous. The shockwave, when it arrived, was a powerful gust of wind that sent hats flying and banners snapping. But it did no real damage. In the ringing silence that followed, everyone looked from the dissipating fireball in the sky back to the man standing on the dais. His golden aura faded, the 5 tails melting away like smoke. He stood panting slightly, his expression grim. He had just saved every single life in the capital city. The moment was broken by a roar from the palace. The king has confessed. He used the dance powder. The royal army is to stand down. It was Crocodile's voice, amplified, projected from the palace by Mr. Two, who had used his clone fruit powers to impersonate the king. It was the final, vicious move. Even with the bomb gone, he was determined to start the war. The rebel army, hearing their worst fears, confirmed, let out a furious cry and charged. The royal army, confused and betrayed, raised their weapons. The civil war was starting anyway. Vivi, who had finally reached the plaza, screamed in despair. No, it's a lie, stop. But her voice was lost in the din. Naruto watched the wave of charging rebels, his face hard. He had saved them from the bomb, but he couldn't save them from their own hatred. Or could he? He took a deep breath, and this time, the power he called upon was different. It wasn't the focused strength he'd used to lift the cannon. It was something broader, more encompassing. His golden aura returned, but it didn't stay close to his body. It expanded. It billowed out from him in a gentle, inexorable wave of pure, benevolent energy. It washed over the front lines of the charging rebels. It washed over the terrified royal soldiers. It swept across the entire plaza, a silent, golden tide. It wasn't an attack. It carried no force. But as it touched them, the red haze of battle fury in the soldiers' eyes cleared. The blind rage, the hatred stoked by years of lies and hardship, was soothed. It didn't vanish, but the sharp, killing edge was blunted, replaced by a profound wave of exhaustion and confusion. Men who had been screaming for blood a second ago now stopped, leaning on their weapons, looking at their countrymen opposite them not as monsters, but as men, just as tired and thirsty as they were. Naruto was pouring his own spirit, his own deep, empathetic understanding of pain and conflict, out into the world. It wasn't mind control, it was a divine-level empathy attack. He was forcing them all to take a breath, to feel the humanity of their enemies. It was costing him. His brow was furrowed in concentration, sweat beading on his temples. Maintaining this field of forced peace over tens of thousands of enraged people was an immense strain. Just then, the rain began to fall. Luffy, having finally, brutally defeated Crocodile with his own blood-soaked fists, had sent the warlord flying, and with his defeat, the dance powder's hold over the nation was broken. Fat, heavy drops of rain, the first in years, began to splash into the dust of the plaza. The rain, combined with Naruto's wave of calming energy, broke the spell of war completely. A soldier dropped his sword. Then another. They looked up at the sky, tears mixing with the rain on their dusty faces. The war was over. Naruto let his aura recede. Staggering as a wave of dizziness hit him. Sanji and Zoro were instantly at his side, supporting him. "You crazy bastard," Zoro said, a note of grudging awe in his voice. "What was that?" "Just asking them to calm down," Naruto panted, a weary smile on his face. Nami ran to them, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and wonder. She had seen it all from a rooftop. The impossible feat of strength, followed by an even more impossible feat of grace. He hadn't just stopped a bomb. He'd stopped a war with his will alone. That night, the crew, battered and bruised but victorious, rested in the royal palace. They were heroes, but the weight of their adventure was heavy. Nami couldn't sleep. The image of Naruto, bathed in golden light, holding back a tide of hatred, was burned into her mind. She found him on a balcony overlooking the now peaceful, rain-soaked city. He was leaning on the balustrade, his shoulders slumped with a weariness that looked more than just physical. "You're making a habit of this," she said softly, joining him. He looked over, his blue eyes looking ancient in the moonlight. "Of what? Standing alone on balconies after you save the world?" He gave a small, tired chuckle. "It's quiet up here." They stood in silence for a while, listening to the gentle patter of the rain. "My whole life," Nami began, her voice quiet and thick with emotion, "I've had to lie. I've had to cheat and steal and manipulate people just to survive. Trust was a luxury I could never afford. Believing in someone, that was the surest way to get your heart broken." She looked at him, her brown eyes shining with unshed tears. "When you told us to trust you about the bomb, every instinct I had screamed it was a trap. A trick. But Usopp, who's afraid of his own shadow, he listened. Luffy, who barely listens to anyone, would have. Zoro and Sanji, they didn't even question it. They just trusted you. They're good friends," Naruto said simply. "No," Nami shook her head. "It's more than that. It's you. You have this certainty. This power. It makes people want to believe you." She took a shaky breath. "Today, I watched you stop a war without throwing a single punch. You didn't force them. You helped them. After everything I've seen, everything I've been through, I didn't think that was possible." He looked away, out at the city. "Pain is pain," he said, his voice distant. "Hate is hate. It doesn't matter if it's in my world or this one. Sometimes, all people need is a moment to remember that." He spoke of a past she couldn't comprehend. Of battles against enemies who were once friends, of a cycle of hatred he had dedicated his life to breaking. He didn't give her details, but he gave her the shape of his own scars, the echo of his own losses. She realized then that his immense power wasn't the most remarkable thing about him. It was his empathy. It was his ability to look at a world of strangers and feel their pain as his own. He Golden God on the dais was just a manifestation of the profoundly kind, and profoundly lonely, man who stood beside her now. "Your dream was to be Hokage," she said softly, remembering their conversation on the Mary. "To be acknowledged, to be loved." She looked at him, at the hero who had saved a nation that didn't know his name. "I think you'd have been a great one." He finally looked at her, and in his eyes, she saw a flicker of the lost boy he once was, a flicker of surprised, heart-wrenching gratitude. He saw that she wasn't just talking about his power. She was talking about him. Nami, he said, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. Your smile, when you're not faking it, it reminds me of what I used to fight for. It reminds me that there are still things in this world worth protecting. The confession hung in the air between them, more intimate than any touch. It was a bridge built between two worlds, between two lonely souls. It wasn't the boisterous, chaotic affection of Luffy, or the flirtatious swooning of Sanji. It was something quieter, deeper. A recognition, an understanding. In the quiet of the rain-swept night, surrounded by a kingdom they had saved, Nami felt the last of her carefully constructed walls begin to crumble. She was falling for the quiet, lonely god who had fallen from the sky. And the thought didn't scare her at all. Far from the celebration, in the shadowy underbelly of Alabasta's port city, a figure in a gray cloak knelt in a darkened alley. It was Whisper, the Sanctorum's assassin. She had been there for the entire battle, a silent, unseen observer. She held a small, silver device in her hand, a data recorder that had analyzed Naruto's energy output. She tapped a control, and a hushed voice emanated from a hidden communicator. Report, Inquisitor. Whisper's voice was a dry rasp, but it held a new, chilling note of concern. The target's capabilities are beyond our projections. He did not just display destructive power. He demonstrated fine control, targeted projection, and a wide-field empathetic manipulation. He quelled a riot of thousands by projecting an aura of peace. There was a long silence on the other end. Then, Valerius's cold voice returned, tighter than before. Empathetic manipulation. The text spoke of it, but it was believed to be a myth. A fable. It is not a fable, Inquisitor. I witnessed it, Whisper stated. This is not a simple beast of destruction like the Sphinx. This anomaly, it has a soul, and it is learning to use it as a weapon. She looked out toward the distant lights of the palace. She had been tasked with a simple mission: find an opportunity to assassinate the target while he was distracted. But after what she had seen, she had made no move. To attack him would have been suicide. He had sensed her, she was sure of it, a brief, passing flicker of his attention that had felt like being seen by God. She made her move now. She melted from the alley, a ghost in the night. She flowed through the streets, her target a single room in the royal palace. She was the purifier. Her purpose was excision. She found his room easily. He was sleeping, the first real sleep he had allowed himself in days. He looked younger, more vulnerable. This was her chance. She drew a thin, wicked-looking blade, its edge coated in a potent, fast-acting neurotoxin developed specifically to disrupt devil fruit abilities. She moved toward the bed, silent as death. She was 2 feet away when his eyes snapped open. They weren't sleepy. They weren't surprised. They were blazing with cold, furious blue light. Before she could even think to strike, his hand shot out and grabbed her wrist. His grip was like iron. At the same time, one of his golden tails, no longer ethereal but terrifyingly solid, erupted from his back and coiled around her throat, lifting her off the ground. She clawed at the energy construct, but it was like trying to claw solid steel. She couldn't breathe. Who sent you? Naruto's voice was not the gentle tone Nami had heard. It was a low, deadly growl. The pressure in the room became immense, suffocating. He wasn't just holding her. He was crushing her will, invading her mind. His eyes glowed, and she felt a terrifying mental intrusion, a forceful rummaging through her surface thoughts. Images flashed through her mind, and he saw them. The sterile white halls, the man with silver hair and cold eyes, the burning island of Oros, and a name, a word she tried desperately to suppress: Sanctorum. Naruto's eyes narrowed, the pressure increased, and Whisper's vision began to tunnel. Just as she was about to black out, the pressure vanished. He dropped her. She collapsed to the floor, gasping for air, her throat bruised. He stood over her, the golden tail still hovering menacingly. Go back to your master, he snarled, his voice a promise of violence. Tell Valerius that I know his name. And tell him if he or any of his purifiers ever come near my friends again, I will burn his entire organization to the ground. He turned his back on her, a deliberate, dismissive gesture. It was a calculated risk, offering her a chance to strike. But she didn't take it. The terror he had inspired was too deep. She knew, with absolute certainty, that if she tried, she would not leave this room alive. Scrambling to her feet, she fled, melting CK into the shadows from whence she came. The threat now had a name. And Naruto had just declared a war. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. What is a god to a fox? The sky was a place of impossible physics and breathtaking beauty. The Going Merry, now equipped with a pair of makeshift wings and a whole lot of reckless optimism, rode the knock upstream like a cork in a geyser. They were thrown into a sea of clouds, a vast, white ocean that stretched to the horizon, dotted with islands of denser, solid-looking vapor. Skypia. For Nami, it was a navigator's dream and nightmare rolled into one. The log pose was spinning uselessly. Compasses were a joke, and the only way to navigate was by sight and by the strange, cloud currents that flowed through the white sea. It was terrifying, exhilarating, and she felt more alive than ever. For Naruto, it was something else entirely. The moment they broke through the cloud line, he felt a profound change. The air here was different, not just in its composition, but in its very energy. It was purer, lighter, saturated with a latent power that resonated deep within his soul. The fusion of his own chakra and Kurama's essence, the devil fruit, had always felt like a contained star within him. Here, it felt like it could breathe. The ambient energy of the sky sea hummed in harmony with his own, and his senses, already preternaturally sharp, expanded to an astonishing degree. He could feel the entire island they landed on, Angel Island, not just as a landmass, but as a living network of life. He felt the individual heartbeats of the winged inhabitants, their curiosity warring with their fear. He felt the earth, the soil they held so sacred, and the deep, ancient history it contained. It was like his sage mode had been activated and amplified 1,000-fold, a constant, low-level connection to the world around him. It was intoxicating. Their arrival was met with suspicion. The self-proclaimed god of this realm, Enel, had strict rules, the Straw Hats had broken half of them just by breathing. They were branded criminals, sentenced to receive heaven's judgment. The judgment came in the form of a massive pillar of lightning, Nding from the sky with a terrifying roar, aimed directly at the center of the Merry. Nami screamed. Usopp shrieked. But before the bolt could strike, Naruto moved. He didn't try to block it or dodge. He simply held up a hand, palm open. A vortex of golden energy, a miniature nine-tailed fox emblem, spun into existence above his palm. The colossal bolt of lightning, powerful enough to obliterate the ship, was drawn into the spinning emblem. It didn't dissipate or explode, it was consumed. Siphoned away into nothingness, absorbed into his body as if he were drinking a glass of water. He lowered his hand, a faint trail of golden steam rising from his fingertips. The air crackled with residual ozone. The Straw Hats stared at him, their mouths agape. Did you just eat lightning? Usopp asked, his voice a squeak. Naruto flexed his fingers, a thoughtful look on his face. Tastes tingly. He looked up at the sky, in the direction the bolt had come from. A slow, dangerous smile spread across his face. Interesting. This act of casual defiance earned them the full attention of God's army. The 4 priests were dispatched, and the deadly ordeal of balls began. But the Straw Hats were the simple-minded blue sea dwellers the Skypians expected. Luffy, with his immunity to blunt force trauma, made a mockery of the ordeal of balls. The rest of the crew, including Naruto, found themselves drawn into a far older conflict. A 400-year war between the Skypians and the Shandians, the descendants of the original inhabitants of the island of Jaya, which had been blasted into the sky. Naruto found himself separated from the others, deep within the upper yard, the holy and forbidden forest that was once half of Jaya. The air here was even more potent, thick with the history and the rage of the Shandian warriors. He could feel their fight, their desperation, their unyielding will to reclaim their homeland. It reminded him of his own clan's history, of the long struggles of the ninja world. He came upon a clearing where one of the priests, a large, stout man named Satori, was terrorizing Sanji and Usopp with a barrage of explosive and impact dials. Hesso, the priest chirped, launching a dragon-shaped explosive. Naruto didn't announce his arrival. He simply appeared behind Satori. The priest, who relied on a form of sensory ability he called mantra, whipped around, his eyes wide with shock. He hadn't felt a thing. How? Naruto's fist, glowing with a soft golden light, connected with Satori's stomach. It wasn't a punch meant to break bones. It was a pulse of pure, focused energy. Satori's eyes rolled back, his body went rigid, and he collapsed like a felled tree, unconscious. Naruto had overloaded his nervous system. He talks too much, Naruto said, shaking his hand as if to rid it of an unpleasant feeling. Sanji, who had been struggling against the endless trickery, stared. You just turned him off. He was annoying, Naruto replied with a shrug. He looked around the forest. This whole island is a battlefield. Where's Luffy? He went after that guy, Usopp supplied, trembling. The one who throws the lightning. Naruto's eyes narrowed. Good. This needs to end. He wasn't just talking about the ordeals. He was talking about the 400-year war. He could feel the pain of it, a wound in the land itself. And at the center of it all was the arrogant, self-proclaimed deity who played with lives from his throne in the clouds. Enel sat on his golden throne aboard his massive, golden ark, the Maxim. He was the picture of indolent, absolute power. His elongated earlobes, the golden staff in his hand, the smug, detached look on his face, it all screamed of a man who had never been challenged. His mantra, a powerful form of observation haki, allowed him to hear the thoughts and feel the presence of every living thing in Skypia. He was omniscient, omnipresent. He was God. He had just dispatched the Shandian warrior, Wiper, with another casual bolt of lightning. He had shocked Sanji and Usopp into unconsciousness. He had toyed with the strange straw hat boy who was made of rubber, an amusing but ultimately trivial anomaly. Now, he was preparing his final act. He would use the Arc Maxim, powered by his own lightning, to generate a cataclysmic thundercloud called the Rago, and wipe Skypia and all its troublesome inhabitants from existence. He would then descend to the fairy Earth, the moon, his rightful celestial kingdom. It was a perfect plan. 5 minutes until the Rago is complete, he murmured to himself, a pleased smile on his face. And then, silence. I wouldn't be so sure about that. The voice was calm, conversational, and it came from right behind him. Enel froze. His mantra, which covered the entire nation, had given him no warning. No footsteps, no hostile intent, no presence at all. It was as if the man had simply willed himself into existence behind his throne. He spun around, his staff crackling with electricity. Standing there, his hands in his pockets, was the blonde blue sea dweller. The one who had absorbed his heaven's judgment. He looked completely unimpressed, his blue eyes scanning the golden arc with a critical, almost dismissive air. You, Enel snarled, his composure cracking for the first time. How did you get here? How did you bypass my mantra? No one moves without my knowing. Your mantra is just a sensory trick, Naruto said, his voice level. You listen for the noise of people's minds, their intent, their fear, but when someone is calm enough, when they can silence their OWN presence, they can walk right through your little web. He took a step forward, his boots making no sound on the golden deck. It's a decent sensory technique. A bit unfocused, but it has potential. The casual, almost academic critique infuriated Enel more than any threat. This mortal, this insect, was critiquing his divine power. Insolent worm, Enel roared, his body dissolving into pure, crackling lightning. He rematerialized in front of Naruto, his hand transformed into a spear of electricity. You dare to judge a god? I will show you the terror of divine punishment. Thor, a massive column of lightning, far more powerful than the one that had targeted the Mary, erupted from his hand, aimed at point-blank range. It should have vaporized Naruto instantly. It didn't. Naruto didn't even flinch. His golden aura flared to life, not as a shield, but as a field of pure, opposing energy. The lightning struck the aura and was torn apart, shredded into harmless particles of light that dissipated around him. The deck beneath his feet wasn't even scorched. Enel stared, his jaw hanging open. Impossible. You are not rubber. How can you be immune to my lightning? Immune? Naruto gave a small, humorless laugh. Your lightning is just energy. A chaotic, uncontrolled burst of it. My power is energy too. But it's focused. It's controlled. Your lightning hitting me is like a splash of water hitting the ocean. It just becomes part of the whole. He took another step, and Enel, for the first time in his life, felt a prickle of genuine fear. This man wasn't a fool like the rubber boy. He understood power, and his own power. It felt insignificant next to the calm, bottomless well of energy radiating from the man in front of him. You call yourself a god, Naruto said, his voice dropping low. His blue eyes starting to glow with a cold, internal light. A god of what? This floating island. You sit on a golden throne and throw lightning at anyone who displeases you. You're not a god. You're a bully. A child with a strong party trick. The insult, so simple, so dismissive, struck Enel harder than any physical blow. It targeted the very core of his identity. I am a god. He shrieked, his face contorted in a mask of rage. He raised his hands to the sky. You will see. 200 million volt Amaru. He transformed, his body swelling into a colossal being of pure, raging electricity. A thunder deity from ancient mythology. The air itself screamed under the pressure of his power. He brought his massive fists down, intending to obliterate Naruto and the entire section of the arc he stood on. Naruto watched the thunder god descend. He sighed, a sound of weary disappointment. Fine, he said, almost to himself. Let's play. He didn't grow in size. He didn't roar. He simply let go. He let go of the tight control he always maintained, the leash he kept on the divine power fused to his soul. 9 tails of pure, incandescent golden energy erupted from his back. They were no longer ethereal and translucent. They were solid, blazing constructs of power, each one the size of a tree trunk. His hair grew wilder, his facial markings deepened, and his eyes began to burn like blue suns. His aura exploded outwards, a wave of pressure so immense it caused the very gold of the arc to groan and buckle. It wasn't the boisterous, chaotic red of Kurama's old chakra cloak. This was something else. It was divine, overwhelming, and utterly, terrifyingly controlled. Enel's colossal lightning form slammed into him. The resulting explosion was silent. There was only a flash of pure, white light that momentarily blinded everyone in Skypia. When vision returned, Enel's Amaru form was gone. He was back in his normal state, on his knees, gasping for breath, his body flickering. As he struggled to maintain his Logia form. Naruto stood over him, untouched, the 9 golden tails swaying behind him like a monarch's robes. The sheer density of the energy they projected was canceling out Enel's devil fruit, forcing him into a tangible state. My turn, Naruto said. One of his tails, moving with impossible speed, lashed out. It didn't strike Enel. It struck the golden bell of the arc, a massive, multi-ton structure. There was no clang. There was a deep, resonant boom of pure energy, and the bell was blasted from its moorings, sent tumbling off the side of the arc to fall toward the island below. Another tail lashed out, striking the arc's main engine. The complex golden machinery crumpled like tinfoil. A third tail whipped around, vaporizing the helm. In seconds, he had surgically and systematically crippled the arc maxim, rendering it nothing more than a falling piece of gilded junk. Enel stared in horror, his god complex shattering like glass. This wasn't a fight. This was a disassembly. Naruto walked up to the kneeling, trembling god. He didn't raise a fist. He just looked down at him with a mixture of pity and contempt. Power isn't about how much you can destroy, Naruto said, his voice echoing with the power of his transformation. It's about what you choose to protect. You have all this strength, and you use it to terrorize people who can't fight back. You are the weakest person I've met on this entire island. He reached down, not to strike, but and grabbed Enel by the front of his robes, lifting him effortlessly. The Reigo, Naruto growled. Dispel it, now. I can't. Enel stammered, terror making his voice thin. It's already formed. It's self-sustaining. It will destroy everything. Naruto looked up at the sky. A monstrous, SWIRLING sphere of black thunderclouds was descending on Skypia, crackling with enough energy to erase the island 100 times over. He could feel the panic from the people below, a wave of pure terror that washed over his senses. He felt Nami's fear, sharp and distinct. He looked back at the terrified man in his grip. Then you are useless. He threw Enel aside like a piece of trash. He turned H. is back on the defeated god and faced the descending apocalypse. He took a deep breath, and his 9 tails began to spin, faster and faster, creating a vortex of golden energy behind him. He brought his hands together in front of his chest, palms open, and a sphere of violently rotating energy, a maelstrom of gold and blue, began to form. It was a Rasengan, but it was not made of chakra. It was made of the raw, divine power of his very soul. It was a star in his hands. You wanted to see a god. Naruto roared, his voice booming across the heavens. He thrust his hands forward. Let me show you a god's power. The sphere of energy shot from his hands, not as a projectile, but as a beam, a colossal pillar of golden light that tore through the sky and slammed into the heart of the Reigo. The clash was a battle of 2 storms. Enel's black, chaotic lightning fought against Naruto's focused, golden tempest. For a moment, they were at a stalemate, a sphere of roiling black and gold energy that lit up the sky. Then, with a final, defiant roar from Naruto, the gold consumed the black. The Reigo didn't just explode. It was unmade. The golden energy tore it apart from the inside out, turning the black clouds to harmless white vapor. The apocalyptic lightning reduced to a brief, beautiful aurora that danced across the sky. In the end, there was nothing left. The sky was clear. The sun shone down on Skypia. Naruto stood on the deck of the falling ark, breathing heavily, his 9 tails slowly receding back into his body. The transformation left him weary, but not depleted. He had faced own a force of nature and had bent it to his will. Down below, the great golden bell he had struck loose fell through the forest, crashing through branches before landing with a thunderous, resonant "O-O-O-O-O-N-G" that echoed across the entire Sky Island. It was the bell of Shandora. The sound their ancestors had promised to ring. For the Shandians, it was the sound of a promise fulfilled, of their home being returned to them. For the Straw Hats, looking for Luffy, it was a beacon, a sign that the battle was won. Naruto looked down, a small, tired smile on his face. He leapt from the edge of the now powerless, falling ark. A flicker of gold carrying him gently down toward the forest below, leaving the whimpering, defeated god alone in his broken kingdom. The feast was legendary. Once the truth was revealed, that Enel was a usurper and the war was based on a misunderstanding. The Shandians and Skypians, united by their shared ordeal and the miraculous return of the Bell of Shandora, celebrated as one people. A massive bonfire lit up the night, and the sound of music, laughter, and the ringing of the golden bell filled the air. The Straw Hats were at the center of it all, lauded as heroes. Luffy was stuffing his face. Zoro was in another drinking contest. Sanji was cooking for a crowd of adoring winged women, and Usopp was telling an epic, and mostly fabricated, tale of his battle against God. Nami, a plate of strange but delicious sky fruit in her hand, found Naruto where she always seemed to find him, away from the main celebration, standing at the edge of the clearing, watching. He was leaning against a giant beanstalk, looking up at the sky, at the moon that seemed so much closer here. She walked over, her heart beating a little faster than usual. She had seen what he did. Everyone had. They had all watched from below as he stood against the descending apocalypse and tore it apart. They had seen the 9-tailed god of light, and the sight was burned into her memory. Saving the world again? She asked, her voice soft. It's becoming a habit. He looked over at her, his expression unreadable in the flickering firelight. The divine power was gone, and he was just Naruto again. Quiet, lonely. But tonight, there was something else in his eyes. A profound peace. This place, he said, his voice a low murmur. It feels right. The energy here, it's like home. Or what home should have felt like. You belong in the sky. She teased gently. Maybe, he admitted with a small smile. Felt good to stretch my legs. Nami's own smile faltered. That thing you did. The 9 tails. The light. I've never been so terrified in my entire life. Her voice trembled slightly. And I've never felt so safe. He looked at her, and the intensity in his blue eyes made her breath catch. I told you, didn't I? I will protect my friends. You didn't just protect us, Naruto, she said, taking a step closer. You obliterated a god. You unmade a storm. What you did, it wasn't just strength. It was a miracle. He was silent for a moment, his gaze searching her face. He wasn't a god. he said finally. Just a man who needed to be reminded he wasn't one. He looked down, a shadow crossing his features. That power, it's dangerous. I know that. I try to keep it controlled. But when I saw that storm coming for all of you, for you, I couldn't hold back. The unspoken admission hung in the air between them. For you. Nami's heart hammered against her ribs. All her life, she had been pragmatic. She valued treasure, security, and tangible things. Love was a fairy tale, a weakness she couldn't afford. But this man, this impossible, lonely, terrifying, and gentle man, he was making her believe in fairy tales. He was the dragon and the night, the storm and the shelter all at once. She looked at the celebrating people, at her friends, happy and safe. She looked at the man who had made it all possible, who asked for nothing in return. All her carefully constructed defenses, all her cynical pragmatism, washed away in a wave of pure, overwhelming emotion. Gratitude, admiration, and something else, something warm and terrifying and wonderful. She didn't think, she just acted. She reached up, her hand cupping his cheek, and stood on her toes. She leaned in and pressed her lips against his. It wasn't a long kiss. It was brief, chaste, just a soft pressure. But it was electric. For Naruto, who had never known this kind of gentle, unprompted affection, it was a shock more profound than any of Enel's lightning. For Nami, it was a leap of faith, an admission of a feeling she hadn't even been willing to admit to herself. She pulled back, her face flushed, her eyes wide with what she'd just done. That's, for saving us, she stammered, suddenly flustered and unable to meet his gaze. Naruto stood frozen, his eyes wide with stunned surprise. His cheek, where her lips had been, tingled. His mind, which could process a battlefield in a microsecond, was completely blank. He slowly raised a hand to touch the spot, a look of dawning wonder on his face. Nami, mortified by her own impulsiveness, turned to flee. Well, I'm going to go check on the fruit punch. But before she could take a step, his hand shot out and gently caught her wrist. She froze, her back to him, her heart threatening to beat its way out of her chest. Nami, he said, his voice rough. She slowly turned to face him. The stunned look was gone, replaced by an expression of raw, open vulnerability. It was the first time she had ever seen him look truly unguarded. Thank you, he whispered. He wasn't talking about the kiss. He was talking about the sentiment behind it. The acceptance. The fact that she had seen his monstrous, divine power and had not run away. She gave him a small, watery smile. Anytime. The moment was broken by Luffy's boisterous shout from across the clearing. Hey, Nami, Naruto, come on. Sanji made Sky Lobster. The spell was broken. Nami pulled her hand free, her face still burning, and scurried toward the fire. Naruto watched her go, a slow, genuine smile spreading across his face. He touched his cheek again. The loneliness he carried like a cloak felt a little bit lighter tonight. He had a family, he had a purpose, and he had just been kissed by a beautiful, brilliant navigator who dreamed of mapping the world. Maybe, just maybe, this new world wasn't so bad after all. Thousands of miles below, on the dark, turbulent waters of the Grand Line, Inquisitor Valerius stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Sanctity. The ship was a marvel of black steel and silent engines, bristling with technology that defied conventional understanding. They had been stalled for days, their advanced sensors unable to penetrate the thick cloud layer of the sky sea. Any change, Lieutenant? Valerius asked, his voice calm and cold. No, sir. The cloud density is unprecedented. We have no way of tracking them. Valerius stared at the roiling clouds above, his face an impassive mask. He knew the Kitsune was up there. He could almost feel him, a mocking presence just beyond his reach. This was not just a hunt anymore, it was becoming a personal frustration. A communications officer turned from his console, his face pale. Inquisitor, we're receiving fragmented reports from a long-range monitoring station in the New World. From the moon. Valerius turned, his eyebrow raising a fraction of an inch. The moon. Yes, sir. The automated Enel observatories. They've detected a massive energy discharge from the Blue Sea. From this exact location, Valerius strode over to the console. The screen showed a series of complex energy graphs. A single, Unbelievable spike dwarfed everything else. What was the signature? Valerius demanded. It doesn't match any known weapon, sir. The officer stammered. The profile it's almost identical to the Kitsune's, but magnified 1,000 times. The scale of it's what the archives describe as a divine class energy event. Valerius stared at the data, his mind racing. A divine class event. The kind of power that could challenge the gods of old. The kind of power that hadn't been seen since the Void Century. He connected the pieces. The legends of the City of Gold. The poneglyphs. The ancient war. The stories passed down within the highest echelons of the world government. The ones the Gorosei themselves whispered about. The Void Century. Valerius breathed, a sudden, chilling understanding dawning on him. It's all connected. The ancient kingdom. The great war. The devil fruits. They weren't just random mutations. They were legacies. Weapons. Get me everything we have on the Shandorians, he commanded, his voice tight with a new, urgent intensity. Their history, their legends, their gods. Cross-reference it with all encrypted data pertaining to the sun god, Nika. He looked back at the sky, his eyes burning with a cold fire. This isn't just a hunt for an anomaly anymore. This is an archaeological dig into the heart of the world's greatest taboo. He was no longer just hunting a fox. He was hunting a piece of history, a living relic of an era the world gove. RN Ment had spent 800 years trying to erase. And the stakes had just been raised to a level he was only beginning to comprehend. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Vow at the Bridge of Hesitation. Water 7 was a city of life. A metropolis built on the bones of its past selves, rising from the sea on stilts and ingenuity. Canals served as streets, gondolas as taxis, and the sound of hammers on steel from tea. He shipwrights of Galila was the city's constant, thrumming heartbeat. It was a place of vibrant, chaotic beauty. It was also where the Straw Hat Pirates' world fell apart. The first blow was the condemnation of the Going Merry. The shipwrights of Galila, the best in the world, had delivered the grim diagnosis: the keel was irreparably damaged. Their beloved ship, their first real home, was dying. The crew fractured under the weight of the news. Usopp, for whom the Merry was a final, tangible link to his home and the girl he loved, could not accept it. His fear and insecurity, the Nawan G feeling of being the weakest link in a crew of monsters, erupted. The argument with Luffy was brutal and heartbreaking. Words were thrown like knives. It culminated in a duel under the stormy night sky, a pathetic, desperate fight that Usopp had no chance of winning. He fought with cleverness and desperation, but Luffy's grief-fueled resolve was absolute. The crew, shattered and grieving, was RCED to watch their captain defeat his friend and leave him behind. Through it all, Naruto was a silent, immovable rock. He stood apart from the arguments, his presence a heavy, somber weight. He didn't offer platitudes or easy solutions. He understood that this was a pain they had to navigate themselves. He watched Usopp's defiant challenge and Luffy's tearful victory, and his heart ached with a familiar pain. He knew the agony of fighting a friend. He had stood in a valley and fought his own brother, Sasuke, their battle scarring the very land. He saw the same tragic necessity in Luffy's actions. Nami found him on the balcony of their hotel room, looking out at the rain-swept city. She was emotionally shredded, torn between her loyalty to Luffy and her profound sympathy for Usopp. "You're not going to say, 'I told you so'?" she asked, her voice hoarse. She had been the one to reveal their money had been stolen, the event that had pushed Usopp over the edge. "There's nothing to say," Naruto replied, his gaze distant. "A captain has to make decisions for the good of the whole crew, even if it breaks his own heart. And a man has to be allowed to fight for what he believes in, even if he's wrong. They're both right, and they're both wrong. It's a mess. So what do we do?" she asked, her voice a desperate plea for an easy answer. "We give them space," he said, turning to look at her. His blue eyes were clear and steady. "And we handle the other problems." The other problems were legion. Their stolen 200 million berries. An assassination attempt on the city's beloved mayor, Iceberg. And the looming, shadowy presence of a clandestine government organization known as CP9. The truth, when it was finally revealed, was a gut punch. Robin, their quiet, enigmatic historian, had been playing a long, painful game. She had surrendered herself to the world government to save them. The assassins were the shipwrights they had trusted, members of CP9 who had been undercover for years. They were taking Robin to Enies Lobby, the Judiciary Island, from which no pirate had ever returned alive. They would force her through the gates of justice into the torture chambers of Impel Down, or worse. For Luffy, the choice was instantaneous. Usopp's departure was a wound, but Robin was family. You don't abandon family. We're going after her, he declared, his voice raw but unshakable. The ride on the sea train, the Rocketman, was a frantic, desperate race against time. Naruto stood at the prow of the weaponized train car, the wind whipping at his hair, his senses stretched to their absolute limit. He could feel Robin. Her presence was a flickering candle in a hurricane, miles ahead of them, surrounded by the cold, predatory energy of the CP9 agents. Her emotions were a storm of resignation, fear, and a tiny, buried spark of hope that was rapidly fading. He focused on that spark. Hold on, Robin, we're coming. Enies Lobby was not a place. It was a declaration of power. A fortress island sitting atop a massive waterfall that emptied into a bottomless abyss. It was connected to the world by a single, drawbridge-like gate. It was the physical manifestation of the world government's absolute justice. The Straw Hats, along with the Frankie family and the Galila foreman, launched a full frontal assault. It was suicidal. It was insane. It was the only way. Luffy, in a moment of pure, unadulterated defiance, stood atop the Tower of Justice, facing Robin across a vast chasm. Robin, he bellowed, his voice echoing across the island. I've come for you. Tell me you want to live. Robin, who had spent her life running, who believed her very existence was a sin that brought destruction to everyone she loved, finally broke. The dam of her composure, held for 20 years, shattered. I want to live, she screamed, tears streaming down her face. Take me to the sea with you. The war began. The Straw Hats fell upon the forces of Enies Lobby like vengeful gods. Each of them faced a member of CP9. A battle that pushed them beyond their limits. Nami, using her new, perfected Klima tact, fought the bubble using Khalifa. Sanji, his leg glowing with demonic fire, battled the wolf like Jabra. And Zoro, his spirit taking the form of a three-headed demon, clashed with the giraffe-powered Kaku in a storm of swords. Naruto's path was a straight, unimpeded line to the main tower. The thousands of marine soldiers and government agents were not obstacles, they were a tide parting before a ship's prow. He didn't stop to fight them. He moved through them, a blur of orange and black. Anyone who tried to stop him was met with a single, precise, disabling blow before they even registered his presence. He wasn't enraged. He was a force of nature with a singular purpose: clear the path. His target was the leader of this generation of CP9, the strongest in their history. Rob Lucci, a man who embodied the cold, brutal ideology of dark justice. A man who had eaten the cat fruit, model, leopard. Naruto found him in a passage leading to the Bridge of Hesitation, the final crossing before the gates of justice. Lucci had just effortlessly defeated a battered but defiant Luffy, sending him tumbling from the tower. The man was calm, adjusting his cuffs, his pet pigeon, Hattori, perched on his shoulder. He was the picture of detached, superior power. You're the anomaly, Lucci said, his voice a low, gravelly monotone. He didn't look at Naruto, but his senses were locked onto him. The one they warned us about. The Kitsune. Your presence here complicates things. Your mistake, Naruto said, his voice dangerously quiet, was touching my friends. Lucci turned, a cold, predatory smile on his lips. Friends. A foolish sentiment. Attachments are a weakness. Justice requires no attachments, only strength. He began to transform, his body swelling, growing, covered in spotted fur. He became a massive, terrifying leopard-human hybrid, a perfect fusee. On of human intellect and animalistic killing power. I will eliminate you, as is my duty. He lunged, his speed otherworldly. He was a blur, his claws aiming to tear Naruto's throat out. His Shigen, a finger pistol technique, was faster than a bullet. Naruto didn't try to match his speed. He didn't need to. As Lucci's claws were inches from his face, 7 golden tails erupted from Naruto's back. They weren't a defensive shield. They were a cage. They whipped around, creating a vortex of golden energy that Lucci slammed into. The CP9 agent was thrown back, his claws scraping uselessly against the solid energy, sparks flying. "You talk about strength," Naruto said, his voice taking on a low, resonant hum as his power filled the chamber. "But your strength is borrowed. From a fruit, from an organization. It's hollow." He moved, and the fight began in earnest. It was not a battle of brute force. It was a clash of speed and precision. Lucci's Rokushiki, the 6 powers, made him a master of movement, offense, and defense. He could leap through the air, harden his body like iron, and attack with the force of a cannon. But Naruto was always a step ahead. His sage-like senses, amplified by his divine fruit, didn't just predict Lucci's movements, they felt the intent behind them. When Lucci used Soru to disappear, Naruto's hand was already waiting where he would reappear. When he used Tekai to harden his body, Naruto's blows, reinforced with his own energy, bypassed the defense, striking at the man within the iron shell. His tails were a whirlwind of offense and defense, acting as extra limbs, blocking, striking, and grappling, their movements a fluid, deadly dance. Lucci, for the first time, was not the predator. He was the prey. He was faster, perhaps, in raw physical bursts. But Naruto was more efficient, more fluid. There was no wasted energy, no theatrical posturing. Every move had a purpose. Rankyaku, Lucci roared, kicking out a blade of compressed air that could slice through steel. A single one of Naruto's tails met the air blade, shattering it into a harmless gust of wind. "This is impossible," Lucci snarled, his composure finally breaking, his face a mask of furious disbelief. "My Rokushiki is perfected. I am the ultimate weapon." "You're a good assassin," Naruto conceded, appearing behind him, his hand hovering over Lucci's back. "But you're not a warrior." He jabbed his fingers forward, striking a precise point on Lucci's spine. It wasn't a shigen, it was a gentle tap. Lucci's body seized, his leopard form flickered, the transformation struggling to hold. Naruto had struck a major nerve cluster, temporarily disrupting the signals between his brain and his devil fruit. "A warrior fights for something," Naruto whispered in his ear. You just follow orders." He drove his palm into Lucci's back. It wasn't a Rasengan. It was a pure, concussive blast of golden energy. The ultimate weapon of the world government was sent flying down the corridor, crashing through wall after wall. A broken puppet with his strings cut. He wasn't dead, but he was defeated, utterly. Naruto didn't spare him a second glance. He turned and ran toward the bridge of hesitation. Luffy had just been revived and was racing to the same spot. Naruto's job was done. He had cleared the way for his captain. But the true battle was only just beginning. The bridge of hesitation was a long, bleak span of steel connecting the Tower of Justice to the gates. It was a place of last chances and final despairs. The Straw Hats, battered but victorious, finally stood reunited, facing the abyss with Robin safely among them. But their escape path was gone. A fleet of warships, a Buster Call, had arrived. 10 battleships, led by 5 vice-admirals, had surrounded the island. Their cannons were aimed. The order was given to fire. To destroy Eni's lobby and everyone on it, friend and foe alike, to ensure Robin and the secrets she carried were erased. Absolute justice. Quote, "They're going to blow up the whole island." Nami screamed, her face pale with terror. The cannons roared. 1,000 shells rained down from the sky. It was an inescapable, apocalyptic barrage. They were all going to die. Naruto stepped in front of them, his back to his friends. He planted his feet, and his face was set in a grim, determined line. He raised his hands, and the golden aura exploded from him. Far more potent and vaster than anything he had shown in Alabasta. It formed a massive, translucent dome of shimmering golden energy over the entire section of the bridge where they stood. The cannonballs struck the dome. The explosions were deafening, a non-stop, cataclysmic roar. The bridge shook, the very air vibrating with concussive force. But the dome held. Inside, the Straw Hats were untouched. Staring in stunned silence as a literal apocalypse rained down upon Naruto's shield. He was on one knee now, his arms trembling, his teeth gritted. The strain of holding back the might of a Buster Call was immense. Even for him. "Naruto!" Nami cried out, rushing to his side, but the energy was a solid wall she couldn't penetrate. "I'm fine," he gritted out, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. "Just a little noisy." Suddenly, the bombardment on their position lessened. The warships were redirecting their fire, focusing on the island itself. And through the smoke and fire, new ships were arriving. Smaller, faster, sleeker ships, painted in stark white and gold. They didn't fly the flag of the world government. They flew no flag at all. On the deck of the lead ship, Inquisitor Valerius watched the unfolding chaos through a pair of high-powered binoculars, his face a cold, impassive mask. "The target has manifested a defensive field capable of withstanding Buster Call-level ordnance," he said to his adjutant. "His energy output is astronomical." He lowered the binoculars. "The Marines are providing the perfect distraction. The target is pinned, defending his friends. He is vulnerable." He turned to his purifiers, who stood ready behind him. "Colossus, Whisper, you know your targets. The objective has changed. We are no longer here for purification. We are here for capture. Subdue the anchor, the navigator, cat burglar, Nami. Use her to draw the Kitsune out." "And what of the Kitsune himself, Inquisitor?" Colossus grunted, hefting a massive, technologically advanced cannon. "I will handle the Kitsune," Valerius said, his gray eyes glinting with cold purpose. "Engage." The purifiers moved. They were shadows in the chaos, using the explosions as cover. Whisper recovered from her earlier encounter, and Colossus, a mountain of armored muscle, leapt from their ship, crossing the chasm in a series of impossibly long bounds, landing on the far side of the Bridge of Hesitation. Behind the straw hats, the crew was focused on the Buster Call, on finding a way to escape. They didn't see the new threat until it was too late. Colossus raised his cannon, not at Naruto, but at Nami. Target acquired. Zoro, his senses screaming, spun around. "Nami, look out!" But he was too far away. The cannon fired. It didn't shoot a shell. It shot a net of glowing, blue energy. A containment field designed to neutralize and capture. Nami's eyes widened in terror. She was frozen, with no time to react. The net never reached her. Naruto, who had been on 1K, straining against a naval bombardment, moved. The golden dome flickered for a bare instant as he diverted a fraction of his focus. A single one of his tails, blazing with furious energy, shot out from the shield, intercepted the net, and tore it to shreds. He turned his head, his body still holding the shield in place, and his eyes met Valerius's across the water. The look in Naruto's eyes was no longer that of a calm warrior. It was pure, murderous rage. The blue of his irises burned with the light of a collapsing star. Then, everything went to hell. Valerius made his move. He didn't leap. He walked off the deck of his ship and strode across the open air as if on solid ground. He was using his devil fruit, the Choku Choku no Mi, creating small, invisible platforms of stasis under his feet. He walked through the fiery, chaotic battlefield as if taking a stroll through a garden, his white and gold uniform untouched by the soot and smoke. He landed on the bridge, 100 feet from Naruto's shield. He raised a hand. "Stasis field. Activate." A wave of invisible energy, a shimmering distortion in the air, expanded from him. It washed over Naruto's dome. The brilliant golden light of the shield didn't shatter. It just snuffed out. Like a candle in a vacuum. The roar of the cannonballs suddenly became terrifyingly real as the last volley screamed down toward them. At the same time, Naruto collapsed. He cried out, not in pain, but in sudden, shocking weakness. His tails vanished. His aura was gone. The divine power that was his lifeblood had been severed, cut off at the source. He was just a man again, kneeling on a steel bridge under a rain of fire. The stasis field. It didn't block or counter devil fruit abilities. It created a zone where they simply ceased to exist. In that horrifying instant, with death screaming down from the sky, two things happened at once. Sanji, in a burst of desperate speed, kicked Nami out of the blast radius. And Zoro, using every ounce of his monstrous strength, grabbed two massive pieces of shrapnel from the ruined bridge and held them up, not as a shield, but as a crude ramp. The cannonballs struck. Most of them hit the bridge, blowing massive holes in the structure. A few struck Zoro's makeshift ramp, the force throwing him back but deflecting them just enough to miss the crew's core. The bridge buckled and groaned, on the verge of collapse. The straw hats were alive, but scattered, wounded, and utterly exposed. Naruto pushed himself to his feet, his body screaming in protest. The sudden disconnection from his power felt like having his soul ripped out. He was panting, his vision swimming. He saw the purifiers, Colossus and Whisper, advancing on Nami. He saw Valerius, standing there, calm and untouchable, the source of his powerlessness. A primal, feral rage, deeper and darker than anything he had ever felt, rose up from the depths of his being. It was the rage of the Kyuubi, the rage of a demon god, but it was his now. It was the rage of a man watching his family about to be taken from him. He roared. It was not a human sound. It was a roar of pure, divine fury, a sound that seemed to tear at the very fabric of the stasis field. For a barest fraction of a second, a flicker of golden energy sparked around him. It wasn't enough to form a tail, not enough to use a technique. But it was enough. He pushed off the deck, his body moving with the raw, physical power of his shinobi training. He was no longer a god. He was a soldier. He drew a kunai, a real one, this time, from a seal on his wrist, and charged. Valerius watched him come, his expression unchanging. Futile. In my field, you are just a man. Naruto didn't answer. He threw the kunai, not at Valerius, but at a strained support cable on the bridge above him. At the same time, he charged not at Valerius, but at Nami. The kunai severed the cable. A massive chunk of steel debris, loosened by the cannon fire, fell from the tower, crashing down toward Valerius. The Inquisitor, with a sigh of annoyance, had to sidestep, his concentration wavering for a microsecond. It was all Naruto needed. He reached Nami just as the purifier, Whisper, lunged with a poisoned blade. He didn't have time to counter. He didn't have time to push her away. So he did the only thing he could. He shielded her with his own body. The blade, thin and wickedly sharp, sank deep into his back. Just below the shoulder blade, a searing, unnatural cold spread from the wound. A specialized neurotoxin, designed to cripple a devil fruit user. In his current state, it was just a potent poison. Naruto grunted, the pain a white-hot flash. But he didn't falter. He spun around, the blade still in his back, his arm lashing out. He grabbed Whisper by the throat, his grip like of ice. He ignored Colossus, who was bringing his cannon to bear, and focused on the immediate threat. And then he looked at Nami. Her face was a mask of pure horror, her eyes wide, tears welling up. As she saw the blade embedded in his back, saw the dark stain of his blood spreading across his orange jacket. In that moment, seeing her terror, something inside him broke. The rage, the fear, the pain, the desperate, primal need to protect her, it all coalesced into a single, burning point of focus. His power, which had been suppressed, choked off by the stasis field, exploded forth. It wasn't the controlled, golden aura of before. It was a volcanic eruption of raw, untamed energy. A monstrous, crimson gold light burst from him, so powerful, so violent, that it physically shattered Valerius's stasis field. The shimmering distortion in the air cracked like glass and disintegrated. Valerius staggered back, his hand flying to his head as if struck, a trickle of blood leaking from his nose. The backlash of having his ultimate technique so brutally broken was immense. Naruto's form began to shift. He grew larger, his muscles swelling. His skin flushed with red gold light, and his features became more feral, more fox-like. The wound in his back steamed, the poison being burned away by his rampaging power. 6 tails, no longer pure gold but a furious, burning crimson laced with gold, erupted from him. Whipping through the air with the sound of cracking thunder. He was no longer Naruto. He was a force of destruction. A demigod of vengeance. He held Whisper in his grip, his claws digging into her flesh. And his burning eyes were fixed on Nami. But the look in his eyes wasn't for Nami. It was for the enemies surrounding her. He opened his mouth, and a voice that was both his and S. Omething ancient and terrible echoed across the bridge. It was a vow, a promise, a threat that froze the very sea. I will burn this world to the ground before I let them touch you. He threw Whisper away, her body tumbling through the air like a discarded doll. He stood over Nami, a monstrous guardian, his 6 furious tails lashing the air, his roar of pure, divine rage echoing across the ruins of Eni's lobby. A sound that momentarily silenced even the fury of the Buster Call. The Straw Hats stared in horror and awe. The Marines on the warships felt a primal fear grip them. And Valerius, wiping the blood from his lip, looked at the raging, semi-divine beast before him. He saw the uncontrolled power, the protective rage, the monstrous transformation. And his conviction, which had been shaken, now hardened into absolute certainty. Proof, he whispered to his broken purifiers. That is the fruit's true nature. Chaos, destruction. It must be excised, at any cost. The lines had been drawn. The hunt was no longer a secret. It was an open war. And Naruto had just shown them what he was willing to become to protect the woman he loved. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The Silence and the Storm. The escape from Eni's lobby was a fever dream of fire, water, and desperation. It was a miracle woven from a dying ship's last wish, a father's grief, and a captain's unshakable faith. They had survived. They had rescued Robin. They were whole, but the cost was etched into the very fabric of their crew. The Going Merry was gone, given a Viking funeral that left every eye wet with tears. And Naruto was a walking storm cloud. The monstrous, six-tailed form had receded as soon as they were safe, the crimson rage fading back into his usual quiet containment. But something had changed. The battle on the bridge, the blade in his back, the vow torn from his soul, it had left a mark. A deep, simmering anger now lay just beneath his calm surface. He was quieter than ever, his smiles rarer, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon, not for land, but for a threat he now knew was hunting them. Nami felt the change most acutely. He was protective to a fault. If a seagull swooped too close to her, his head would snap up. His blue eyes flashing with a dangerous light for a bare instant. He'd taken to sleeping on the deck outside the women's quarters on the new ship, the Magnificent Thousand Sunny, a silent, self-appointed guardian. It was flattering, it was romantic, and it was deeply, deeply worrying. She had seen the monster he could become for her, and she was terrified of what it might cost him. Their new bounties only made things worse. Every member of the crew was now a globally recognized criminal. But Naruto's poster was different. It was a grainy, chaotic image captured during the Buster Call, showing a blazing, multi-tailed figure of golden light. It had no name, just a moniker, Kitsune. And the bounty was astronomical, a number so high it was clearly not just for piracy, but for existence itself. The bounty read, dead or alive, but the unspoken preference was clear. They needed a sanctuary, a place to lie low, to repair their fractured spirits and figure out their next move. Nami, using a series of old, half-forgotten sea charts and a healthy dose of navigational genius, found one, a small, uncharted island in a notoriously treacherous stretch of the Gra. ND line known as the Mariner's Graveyard, a place where strange currents and magnetic anomalies made passage nearly impossible. It was perfect. The island was a paradise. A lush, jungle-filled interior. A pristine white sand beach encircling a calm, turquoise lagoon, and, most importantly, no sign of human life. For 3 days, it was bliss. Luffy and Usopp explored. Zoro trained. Sanji experimented. NTED with new recipes using the island's strange fruits. Frankie worked on the Sunny's systems. Chopper gathered medicinal herbs. Robin read, a genuine, peaceful smile on her face for the first time. Amy used the time to try and break through Naruto's wall of silence. She found him on the beach one evening, skipping stones across the placid water of the lagoon. You know, for a god-level entity, why? We're surprisingly good at lazing around, she teased, sitting beside him in the sand. He didn't smile. Practice. Naruto, talk to me, she said, her voice softening. Ever since Eni's lobby, you've been 1,000 miles away. He sighed, letting the last stone drop from his hand. That man, Valerius, his power, I've never felt anything like it. It didn't fight my energy, it just turned it off. Like flipping a switch, I was helpless. The admission was raw, torn from a place of deep-seated pride. When that blade went into my back, it wasn't the pain. It was the fact that I couldn't stop it. The fact that you were almost, he couldn't finish the sentence. But you did stop it, she insisted, her hand finding his. His fingers were cold, and then you changed. That wasn't me, he said, his voice a low, harsh whisper. He pulled his hand away. That was the rage, the power of the fruit when it's not controlled. It's a mindless, destructive force. I could feel it wanting to tear everything apart. The bridge, the ships. Them, everything. I was barely holding on, Nami. If I had lost control for one more second. But you didn't, she said firmly. You held on. You protected me. You saved us. This time, he said. His gaze dark. What about next time? What if he pushes me further? What if I can't stop it? He finally looked at her, his eyes filled with a desperate, terrifying fear she had never seen in him before. What if I become the monster that hurts you? Before she could answer, a shadow fell over them. It started subtly. A strange quiet descended on the island. The chirping of the jungle insects faded. The cry of the gulls ceased. The gentle lapping of the waves against the shore seemed to muffle, the sound dying in the air. Naruto shot to his feet, his senses screaming. Something's wrong. The feeling was sickeningly familiar. It was a creeping numbness, a deadening of the world's energy. It was the feeling of a switch being flipped. His connection to the divine power within him, which had been a roaring fire moments ago, was suddenly choked, sputtering, reduced to a faint ember. He's here, Naruto growled, his body tensing, falling into a low, defensive stance. From the jungle, figures emerged, clad in white and gold, their faces hidden by impassive metal masks. The purifiers. But there were more of them this time. A dozen, at least. They fanned out, creating a perimeter around the beach, their strange, advanced weapons glinting in the late afternoon sun. Then, Valerius appeared. He walked out of the trees, looking as immaculate as he had amidst the flames of Eni's lobby. He wasn't walking on air this time. He didn't need to. A beautiful island, Valerius said, his voice calm and carrying in the unnatural silence. A fitting place for a tomb. Luffy and the others came running from the ship in the jungle, drawn by the sudden silence. They stopped short, their eyes wide as they saw the armed soldiers. It's them, Luffy snarled, his hand clenching into a fist. Gomu Gomu no. He tried to stretch his arm, but it remained stubbornly normal. He looked at his hand in confusion. Huh, what's wrong? Chopper, who had started to shift into one of his points, suddenly reverted to his tiny, hybrid form, a look of shocked panic on his face. Robin tried to cross her arms, to sprout a limb from the ground, but nothing happened. Our powers, they're gone. Usopp shrieked. Valerius smiled, a cold, thin thing devoid of any warmth. Welcome to my domain, Straw Hat Pirates. This entire island is now under the influence of my Choku Choku no Mi. A stasis field. Here, the unnatural energies you call devil fruit abilities simply cease to be. Here, you are all just ordinary, fragile humans. Zoro and Sanji drew their weapons, their faces grim. Their strength wasn't from a fruit. Doesn't matter, Zoro growled. We can still fight. Indeed, Valerius acknowledged. But you are outmatched. He gestured to his purifiers. My elite guard, trained from birth to combat anomalies like you. They are equipped with weaponry developed from technology you cannot comprehend. This will not be a battle. It will be an execution. His cold gray eyes settled on Naruto. And as for you, Kitsune, stripped of your divine power, what are you? Just a boy. This ends now. Naruto's face was a mask of cold fury. His tails were gone. His aura was gone. But the shinobi, the soldier forged in the crucible of the Fourth Great Ninja War, remained. He cracked his neck, his knuckles, a series of sharp, dangerous sounds in the silence. You took my power, Naruto said, his voice a low growl. Big mistake. It was the only thing holding me back. He didn't wait for them to attack. He moved. The battle that followed was desperate and brutal. The Straw Hats, stripped of their trump cards, were at a severe disadvantage. The purifiers were everything Valerius had promised. Fast, skilled, and ruthlessly efficient. Their weapons fired blasts of concussive force and nets of sea stone. The one material that could drain a fruit user's strength even without their active powers. Luffy, unable to stretch, fought with clumsy but powerful brawling. Sanji's kicks were still formidable, but he was forced onto the defensive by two purifiers who moved in perfect, deadly sync. Zoro found himself locked in a furious duel with a massive, 7-foot-tall Purifi. wielding a high-frequency blade that could parry his swords. The focus of the battle, however, was Naruto. Without his golden tails and energy blasts, he was a different kind of fighter. He was a ghost. He flowed through the battlefield. His movements economical and brutally effective. He snatched a discarded piece of driftwood, its edge sharpened by the rocks, and used it as a makeshift blade. He used the terrain, kicking up sand to blind an opponent, using a palm tree as a springboard for a devastating kick. It was pure, unadulterated taijutsu, honed by a lifetime of war. He wasn't a god anymore. He was a ninja, and he was terrifying. He disabled 3 purifiers in the first minute, not killing them, but striking pressure points, dislocating limbs, and leaving them twitching and unconscious on the sand. Valerius watched, his cold composure finally showing a flicker of surprise. He had expected a panicked boy. He had not expected a seasoned, elite warrior. Impressive, Valerius conceded, but you cannot win. He entered the fray himself. He was a large man, but he moved with a surprising grace. He didn't have the fluid speed of Naruto or the Rokushiki masters, but his movements were powerful and direct. He fought with a pair of ornate, sea-stone-tipped tonfas. The clash between Naruto and Valerius was the heart of the storm. It was a battle of 2 ideologies. Naruto, all fluid motion and precise, disabling strikes. Valerius, all powerful blocks and crushing, bone-shattering blows. Naruto was faster, more agile. Valerius was stronger, more durable, and his sea-stone whip sent a jolt of debilitating weakness through Naruto every time they connected. Naruto was fighting a losing battle. He was accumulating bruises and cuts. His stamina, without his fruit's enhancement, was beginning to wane. The rest of the crew was faring no better. They were being systematically corralled, pushed back toward the water, their backs to the sea. Nami, armed with her Kleam attack, had been trying to provide support, launching small gusts of wind and creating illusory duplicates of herself. But against these elite soldiers, her tricks were little more than a nuisance. One of the purifiers, a lithe woman with twin daggers, broke through Sanji's defense and charged directly at her. Nami, Naruto screamed, seeing the danger. He tried to disengage from Valerius, but the Inquisitor pressed his attack, giving him no quarter. Nami frantically assembled her Kleam attack, her mind racing. The stasis field, it nullified devil fruits, unnatural energies. But what about natural ones? Her Kleam attack didn't create weather out of nothing. It manipulated temperature and humidity. It used the existing properties of the atmosphere. Was that unnatural, or was it just science? It was a desperate gamble. She aimed the staff, not at the charging purifier, but at the sky. Thunder tempo, she yelled, her voice trembling. Nothing happened. The purifier sneered under her mask and lunged. Nami gritted her teeth, tears of frustration in her eyes. No, think, Nami, think. The air, the island, the lagoon, the heat of the day, the cold of the sea. All the ingredients were there. She just needed a catalyst. A bigger one. She reconfigured the Kleam attack, forming a strange, windmill-like shape. She poured all her knowledge, all her desperation, into this one last try. She wasn't just trying to create a small cloud. She was trying to create a feedback loop, to destabilize the entire microclimate of the lagoon. Cyclonic burst. She slammed the base of the staff into the sand. A wave, of super-cooled air shot out over the warm water of the lagoon, while simultaneously, a ball of intense heat was launched high into the humid air above it. For a second, nothing happened. The purifier's blade was inches from her throat. Then, the world changed. The sudden, extreme temperature differential created a violent atmospheric reaction. The calm air over the lagoon began to spin. A small waterspout formed, then another. Then another. The wind picked up, howling, kicking up sand and water. The sky, which had been clear, darkened with astonishing speed as clouds boiled into existence. A massive, unnatural, localized storm cell formed directly over the island. The purifiers stopped, looking up in confusion. Valerius, for the first time, looked genuinely shocked. What is this? This shouldn't be possible in my field. Your field stops devil fruits, you pompous ass. Nami screamed, a wild, triumphant grin on her face. You can't stop the weather. This is science. A bolt of raw, natural lightning, drawn by the storm. struck the beach with a deafening crack. It didn't hit anyone, but the sheer electromagnetic pulse it generated caused the purifiers, advanced weaponry to spark and fizzle. The power packs on their cannons overloaded. The energy systems in their masks shorted out. And most importantly, the massive, island-wide stasis field, which relied on a network of hidden, technologically advanced projectors, flickered. It was only for a second. But for Naruto, a second was an eternity. In the instant the field wavered, the connection to his power slammed back into him. A single, brilliant golden tail erupted from his back. He didn't use it to attack. He used it to move. He coiled it like a spring and launched himself away from Valerius, a golden blur of motion. He appeared in front of Nami, placing himself between her and the stunned purifiers. The stasis field snapped back into place, and his tail vanished, but the damage was done. He was where he needed to be. The storm Nami had created was now a raging tempest. The wind howled, the rain fell in blinding sheets, and the waves of the lagoon crashed against the shore. The purifiers' technological advantage was gone. They were now just soldiers in a hurricane, their formations broken, their communications scrambled. Valerius stared, his face a mask of cold fury. His perfect trap, his checkmate, had been undone. Not by the god-powered anomaly, but by a simple navigator and her understanding of the weather. Retreat, Valerius commanded, his voice barely audible over the roar of the wind. All units, fall back to the ship. He gave Naruto one last, hate-filled glare. This is not over, Kitsune. I will hunt you to the ends of the earth. He turned and vanished back into the jungle, his remaining purifiers scrambling after him. The storm, its purpose served, began to dissipate as quickly as it had formed. The wind died down, the rain lessened, and the sun broke through the clouds. The straw hat stood on the ravaged beach, bruised, battered, and breathing heavily, but alive. Victorious. Nami's legs finally gave out, and she collapsed to her knees in the sand, her body trembling with adrenaline and exhaustion. Naruto was instantly by her side, kneeling in front of her. He gently took her face in his hands, his thumbs wiping the rain and tears from her cheeks. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice thick with concern. She just shook her head, unable to speak. She looked at him, at the cuts and bruises on his face, the dark patch of drying blood on his torn jacket where Valerius's tonfa had struck him. He had been powerless, beaten, but he had still thrown himself in front of her. "I was so scared," she finally whispered, her voice breaking. I thought we were going to lose." "We were," he admitted, his voice a low rumble. "You saved us, Nami. Your dream, your knowledge, it saved all of us." He looked at her with an expression of such raw admiration, such profound respect, that it stole her breath away. He wasn't looking at a weak crewmate he needed to protect. He was looking at an equal, a partner. The weight of the battle, the terror of his powerlessness, the fear of losing her, it all crashed down on him. The careful walls he had built around his heart crumbled to dust. He was no longer a god, no longer a shinobi, no longer a hero. He was just a man, tired and scared and overwhelmingly grateful for the brilliant, terrifying, wonderful woman in front of him. He leaned in, his movements hesitant, and captured her lips with his. This kiss was nothing like the chaste, impulsive peck in Skypia. This was raw, desperate, and deeply passionate. It was a kiss born of shared terror and shared triumph, a collision of two souls who had just stared into the abyss and pulled each other back. It was a confirmation of everything that had been unspoken between them, a silent vow that tasted of salt, and rain, and blood. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathless. They rested their foreheads together, the world shrinking to the space between them. "I was terrified of losing you," he confessed, his voice ragged. "I know," she whispered back, her hand coming up to cup his bruised cheek. "Me too." She looked into his eyes, no longer seeing a god or a monster, but the man behind them. The lonely boy who had fallen from the sky and had just found his new home. "I love you, Naruto." The words, spoken so simply, so honestly, struck him with the force of a physical blow. Love. It was the thing he had craved his entire life, the acknowledgement he had fought and bled for. And here it was, given freely, unconditionally, by the one person whose opinion had come to matter more than anyone else's in this strange new world. A slow, Brilliant smile spread across his face. A smile so full of warmth and pure, unadulterated joy that it seemed to light up the entire beach. It was the smile of the boy he had been, the Naruto who dreamed of being Hokage, free from the weight of war and loss. "I love you too, Nami," he said, and the words felt more real, more powerful than any divine transformation. Aboard the Sanctity, retreating at full speed from the storm-racked island, Valerius stood in his private chamber. It was a sparse, monastic room, the only decoration a single, framed photograph on his desk, the peaceful town of Oros, before the fire. He had failed. His prey had escaped. His perfect trap had been defeated by a meteorologist with a stick. The humiliation was a cold, bitter pill. Whisper entered the room, her arm in a sling, her mask gone, revealing a face pale with fatigue. "Inquisitor, the fleet is requesting new orders." Valerius didn't turn. "The objective has changed once more. The Kitsune's anchor, the navigator, she is not merely his weakness. She is his strength. Her mind, her skills, they complement his power in ways we did not anticipate. They are a synergistic threat." He turned, his face a mask of cold, calculating fury. The defeat had not broken his resolve. It had focused it into a single, razor-sharp point. "Previous protocols are insufficient," he declared. "We can no longer afford to simply hunt him. We must dictate the battlefield. We must separate him from his support structure. We must isolate the anchor and remove her from the equation. Permanently." He walked to a secure communications console. Ian pressed a series of encrypted keys. A line opened directly to the highest authority in the world government. The shadowed visages of the 5 elders appeared on the screen. Inquisitor Valerius, one of the elders spoke. His voice ancient and brittle. "Report. The Kitsune has proven more resourceful than anticipated," Valerius said, his voice betraying no hint of his earlier failure. "His bond with his anchor, the navigator, cat burglar, Nami, is the fulcrum of his power and his resilience. Standard purification protocols have failed." There was a long silence. Then, another elder spoke, his voice a deep, resonant bass. "We anticipated this contingency. Your failure was probable. The 9th has always been the most troublesome." Valerius's eyes narrowed. "Sir, your mission is now secondary, Inquisitor." The elder continued. "A new directive has been issued from the highest authority. You are to track the Straw Hat crew. You will not engage. You will merely observe and report. The capture of the anchor is now a priority for a specialist." A chill went down Valerius's spine. There was only one specialist the Gorosei would deploy for a threat of this magnitude. An operative so secret, so powerful, that even Valerius himself had only ever read of him in the most highly classified texts. An agent who answered only to the Gorosei themselves. The elder's voice dropped, becoming a cold, deadly whisper. "The order has been given. We are deploying God's shadow." The transmission cut out, leaving Valerius alone in the silence of his chamber. God's shadow. The ultimate cleaner. The one they sent when an admiral wasn't enough, and a buster call was too messy. The hunt had just escalated to a level he couldn't control, and he knew, with a chilling certainty, that the next time the Straw Hats were found, the battle would not be one they could win with a clever trick or a localized storm. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. A God's Roar, a Lover's Farewell. The Sabayati archipelago was not an island, but a forest. A grove of 79 colossal mangrove trees, the Urukiman, whose roots breathed air and secreted a special resin that formed bubbles, strong enough to lift ships and carry people through the air. The archipelago was a lawless, vibrant, and deeply dangerous place, the last stop before the New World, teeming with pirates, bounty hunters, slavers, and nobles. It was a microcosm of the world's dream and its depravity, all clustered under the canopy of giant trees. For the Straw Hats, it was a necessary stop. They needed to have their ship coated by a specialist to survive the immense pressures of the deep-sea passage to Fishman Island. But the moment they arrived, the air felt wrong. The joyous, chaotic energy of the place was underpinned by a current of deep-seated fear and cruelty. This was most evident in the human auction houses, where beings of all races were sold like cattle to the highest bidder. And then there were the celestial dragons. The world nobles, descendants of the founders of the world government, strolled through Sabayati with an air of absolute, unassailable authority. They wore bubble helmets to avoid breathing the same air as Kimono. RS and treated every non-noble as less than dirt. To strike a celestial dragon, for any reason, was an act of war against the world itself, an offense that would bring an admiral and a fleet down upon you. The crew split up, each with their own tasks, a sense of unease hanging over all of them. Nami, Naruto, and Frankie went to find the coding mechanic, while the others explored. The confession on the deserted island had changed everything between Nami and Naruto. The quiet tension was gone, replaced by a comfortable, easy intimacy. A shared look across a crowded street, the light brush of his hand against hers as they walked. His quiet presence a constant, reassuring warmth at her back. It was a silent conversation, a language only they understood. She had never felt so cherished, so completely and utterly safe. His love was not a cage, but a shield. They found the mechanic, a grizzled old pirate named Silvers Rayleigh, the former first mate of the Pirate King himself. But their meeting was cut short by chaos. A fish man, their old acquaintance Hatchin, had been shot by a celestial dragon, St. Charlos, for the simple crime of being in his way. Luffy, arriving on the scene, saw his friend writhing in pain on the ground. The smug, pig-like noble laughing over him. Every instinct Nami had screamed at her. Run. Don't look. Get away. She knew what was about to happen. Naruto felt it too. His hand found hers, his grip tight and reassuring. His face was a thundercloud. He had seen this kind of casual, arrogant cruelty before. It was the same entitlement that fueled men like Arlong. The same rot at the core of the world. Luffy walked forward, his face shadowed by his straw hat. Luffy, no, Nami screamed, her voice filled with terror. You can't, it's an admiral. But Luffy didn't listen. He never did when a friend was hurt. He walked past the terrified, cowering crowd, his steps measured and deliberate. St. Charlos pointed his pistol at him. You dare to look at me, peasant. The noble sneered. Luffy's fist shot out. The punch was not his usual wild, rubbery haymaker. It was a precise, brutal, and utterly cathartic strike. It connected with the celestial dragon's ace with a sound that echoed through the entire grove, a beautiful, satisfying crunch. St. Charlos went flying, his bubble helmet shattering, his body crashing through a wall in a display of pure, righteous fury. Silence. A profound, world-stopping silence fell over Sabayati. Then, panic. Everyone who had witnessed the act screamed and fled, knowing what was coming. He did it, Nami whispered, her face pale as a sheet. It's over. Naruto squeezed her hand. No, he said, his voice a low growl. It's just beginning. The arrival of the Marines was swift. But they were just the prelude. The eel thread appeared in a blinding flash of yellow light. Admiral Kizaru, a man who had eaten the glint fruit, a being of pure light, impossibly fast and devastatingly powerful. With him were the pacifistas. Human weapons modeled after the warlord Bartholomew Kuma, cyborgs capable of firing lasers from their mouths. The Straw Hats, reunited by the crisis, found themselves in a battle they could not win. They were hopelessly outmatched. Kizaru moved at the speed of light, his attacks effortless and overwhelming. Zoro, still wounded from his encounter with Kuma at Thriller Bark, was struck down in an instant. Usopp and Brook were next. Naruto met Kizaru head-on. It was a battle of pure energy. Kizaru's light-based lasers were absorbed or deflected by Naruto's golden aura, which flared to life. His instincts screaming at the sheer level of threat. Naruto's own energy blasts were dodged by Kizaru, who simply dissolved into light and reformed elsewhere. It was a stalemate of gods, a beautiful, terrifying dance of gold and yellow light that shattered the mangrove roots around them. Ooh, scary, Kizaru said in his slow, infuriatingly nonchalant drawl. A mythical zone, and a powerful one at that. The Kitsune, I presume, your bounty is quite impressive. He aimed a finger at Naruto. But can you protect all your little friends at once? He fired a beam of light, not at Naruto, but at Nami. Naruto moved, a blur of golden motion, appearing in front of her and taking the blast on his outstretched palm. The force of it singed his hand and sent a jolt up his arm, but he held his ground. This was their strategy, to divide and conquer. While Naruto was occupied with the admiral, the pacifistas were systematically dismantling the rest of the crew. It was a turkey shoot. Then, the real Kuma appeared. Not a cyborg copy, but the warlord himself. His face was blank, his actions robotic. He approached the struggling Zoro. "If you were to go on a trip," Kuma said, his voice a deep, monotone rumble. "Where would you like to go?" He touched Zoro with his palm, and the swordsman vanished. Not killed, not injured. Simply gone. One by one, he began to send the straw hats away. ACH touch of his paw-padded hand sent a crew member flying through the air, disappearing into the sky, sent to an unknown destination days away. It was a strange, terrifying, and incomprehensible attack. The crew was being scattered to the winds. Panic seized Nami's heart. She saw Luffy screaming in helpless rage, saw her friends disappearing one by one. This was it. This was their end. Their adventure. Their dreams, all of it. Dying in a forest of giant trees. Naruto saw it too. He was locked in his impossible duel with Kizaru, the Admiral's speed making it impossible for him to land a decisive blow. He could protect himself, but he couldn't be everywhere at once. He saw Kuma approaching Sanji. He saw a pacifista taking aim at a terrified Nami. He had to end this. Now. Kizaru. Naruto roared, his voice shaking the grove. He let his aura explode outwards, 9 golden tails blazing into existence. He wasn't aiming for a surgical strike. He was aiming for overwhelming force. He brought his hands together, a massive, swirling sphere of golden energy, a recentricon of divine power, forming between them, its shriek tearing at the air. Kizaru's lazy expression finally turned serious. He recognized an attack that could genuinely harm him. He brought his own hands together, gathering light for his own ultimate technique, the Yasukani sacred jewel. But just as they were about to unleash their world-shattering attacks, another player entered the field. Inquisitor Valerius and his purifiers. They didn't engage Kizaru. They didn't attack Naruto. They moved with a singular, chilling purpose. Their target made clear by the Gorosei's new directive. They charged toward Nami. Kuma, his face impassive, also turned his attention to Nami. If you were to go on a trip, Naruto's world collapsed into a vortex of pure, primal terror. Kizaru in front of him. Kuma and Valerius converging on Nami. He had a choice to make, in a single, horrifying microsecond. Unleash his attack on Kizaru and leave Nami exposed. Or abandon his attack and try to reach her, leaving himself open to the Admiral. He didn't hesitate. He let the recentricon dissipate, the energy washing over him, and spun around, launching himself toward Nami. He was too late. He saw Kuma's large, paw-padded hand strike Nami's shoulder. He saw Valerius's hand, reaching to intercept, missing by a fraction of a second. He saw the look of pure, uncomprehending terror on Nami's face as her body lifted from the ground and began to fly away, disappearing into the sky like all the others. Naruto didn't know Kuma's power. He didn't know he was saving them. All he saw was an enemy striking the woman he loved. All he saw was his entire world being torn from his grasp. The leash he kept on his power, the control he had fought so hard to maintain. The humanity he clung to, it didn't just break. It atomized. Something inside him snapped. The world went silent. Then it exploded. It was not the controlled, golden rage of Eni's lobby. It was not the burning crimson of the Bridge of Hesitation. This was something new, something final. A pillar of pure, incandescent energy, so bright it dwarfed Kizaru's light, erupted from Naruto, climbing miles into the sky, punching a hole through the canopy of the mangrove forest and into the heavens above. The ground for a mile in every direction cracked and split. The colossal roots of the Urukiman trees groaned and splintered under the sheer pressure. Kizaru, for the first time in his life, looked genuinely alarmed. He abandoned his attack and flashed away, putting distance between himself and the cataclysm. Valerius and his purifiers were thrown back, their advanced armor denting and cracking from the shockwave alone. Kuma, his face still impassive, stood his ground, a bubble of his own power protecting him. Where Naruto had stood, a new being was taking form. Energy coalesced, growing at an exponential rate. It took the shape of a fox. A colossal, 9-tailed fox. Its body made not of flesh or fur or even chakra, but of raw, seething, divine light. It was the size of a mountain, its tails whipping through the air and leveling entire sections of the forest with each casual flick. Its fur was the color of a newborn star, and its eyes were twin blue voids of absolute grief and rage. This was no longer a hybrid form. This was not Naruto borrowing the fruit's power. This was the fruit's true, unrestrained form, a complete transformation into a legend, a god of destruction made manifest. It was the apocalypse class manifestation Valerius had read about in He archives and prayed he would never see. The colossal fox threw its head back and roared. The sound was not a sound. It was a physical force, a wave of pure, world-breaking power that shattered every window in the Sabayati archipelago. It sent a tsunami rolling back from the shores. The shockwave traveled for miles, a tremor felt by the psychics and powerful individuals across the globe. On the Moby Dick, Whitebeard paused, his drink in his hand, and looked toward the horizon. What in the hell was that? On a distant island, Shanks's hand went to his sword, a grim look on his face. In the headquarters of the Revolutionary Army, Dragon turned from his maps, his eyes wide. The pressure emanating from the fox was so immense it felt like gravity itself had been multiplied by 1,000. It was forcing Kuma to his knees. It was causing the very air to ionize. The last thing Nami saw before she vanished completely into the sky was the sight of that beautiful, terrifying, monstrous being. The form of the man she loved, twisted into a creature of apocalyptic power, roaring his grief and rage at the empty sky where she had been. And in that final moment, she wasn't afraid of it. Her heart just broke for it. For him. The fox's rampage was mindless, indiscriminate. It was pure, grieving instinct. It was about to unleash an attack, a Biju bomb of pure, divine energy that would not just wipe Sabayati off the map, but would likely destabilize the entire Grand Line. Kuma, his form straining under the pressure, knew he had to act. He had promised Dragon he would save the Straw Hats. But, saving them from this was not part of the plan. He had to end this before the world itself paid the price. He appeared before Luffy, the last Straw Hat remaining. Luffy was on his knees, weeping, having watched his entire family defeated and scattered. "We will not meet again," Kuma said, his voice holding, for the first time, a flicker of something that might have been regret. "Farewell." He touched Luffy, and the boy vanished. Then Kuma turned to the roaring, grieving god beast. He appeared before it, a tiny, insignificant figure before a mountain of light. He couldn't fight it, he couldn't stop it, but maybe, just maybe, he could reach the man inside. He pushed his own power to its absolute limit, creating a bubble of pain and grief, extracted from his own long, tragic life, and fired it at the colossal fox. It was a desperate, symbolic gesture, a plea from one broken soul to another. The bubble of sorrow struck the fox. It had no physical effect, but for a single, fleeting instant, the blue void eyes of the beast flickered. A hint of confusion, a flash of a memory. A girl with orange hair, smiling at him on the deck of a ship. The gathering energy for the world-ending attack wavered. The monstrous form flickered, destabilized by the sudden intrusion of a single, human memory. The transformation collapsed. The mountain of light imploded, rushing back into a single point. Naruto fell to the ravaged, burning earth, his body reverting to its human form. He was unconscious before he hit the ground, smoke rising from his skin, the backlash of unleashing such power having burned him out from the inside. Kuma stood over his unconscious form, his own circuits sparking, his systems overloaded from proximity to the event. He looked down at the boy who had almost destroyed the world out of love. He looked at the devastation. Then he, too, vanished. Naruto awoke to the scent of flowers and the soft sound of women's voices. He was in a bed, a real bed, softer than any he had ever known. His body ached with a deep, bone-weary exhaustion that felt like it had settled into his very marrow. He sat up, his head pounding. He was in a large, ornate room, decorated in a style he didn't recognize. He looked down at his hands. They were his. He was human. The memories came back in a flood. The auction house, the punch, Kizaru, the pacifistas, his friends, vanishing one by one, and Nami. The look on her face as Kuma's hand touched her. And then, the roar, the rage, the fire, the feeling of becoming infinite. He scrambled out of bed, staggering. He had to find her. He had to find them all. He stumbled out of the room into a massive, open-air coliseum. 1,000 women, all dressed in warrior's garb and armed with bows, immediately aimed their arrows at him. In the center of the arena stood a woman of impossible height and beauty, with long black hair and a cold, imperious gaze. A massive snake was coiled around her. This was Boa Hancock, the pirate empress, the ruler of Amazon Lily. The island of women. The man is awake, she said, her voice dripping with contempt. He has trespassed on our sacred island. He will fight for his life in the arena. If he survives our warriors and our sacred beast, Bakura, then I will kill him myself. Naruto barely heard her. His senses, dull and aching from his ordeal, were slowly coming back online. He could feel it. He was alone. The life signs of his friends, the familiar anchors of their presence, were gone. They were scattered across the face of the planet. And he remembered the last thing he had seen. The look of terror on Nami's face. Terror of him, of the monster he had become. The grief and self-loathing hit him like a physical blow, bringing him to his knees. He had lost control. He had become the very thing he had feared. A mindless beast of destruction. He had terrified her. The warriors of Amazon Lily saw a man on his knees, seemingly broken. They saw an easy victory. Naruto closed his eyes, taking a deep, shuddering breath. He was alone again, back where he had started. But this time was different. This time, it wasn't a world he had lost. It was a family he had to get back. A promise he had to keep. A love he had to prove he was worthy of. He opened his eyes. The grief was still there, a cold, hard stone in his chest. But beneath it, a new fire was kindling. A fire of absolute, unshakable resolve. He had to get stronger. Not just in raw power. He had to master this monstrous force inside him. He had to control the god, tame the fox, so that he could wield its power without losing himself. So that he could be a shield for his friends, not a threat to them. So that he would never, ever see that look on Nami's face again. He stood up, his posture straightening, his blue eyes clearing, burning now with a cold, determined light. He looked at the 1,000 arrows aimed at him, at the Empress on her throne, at the massive panther-like beast being released into the arena. He saw them not as threats, but as the first step, the first obstacle on his long road back to her. Far away, in an office at the heart of the world, one of the 5 elders looked at a report detailing the cataclysm at Sabayati. The energy readings were off the charts. The devastation was absolute. The Kitsune has reached the apocalypse class manifestation, a subordinate reported, his voice trembling. All previous protocols are void. The elder with the long, white beard and the sword stood, his face in shadow. Then it is time, he said, his voice like the grinding of tectonic plates. We will not make the same mistake our ancestors did. We will not allow the ninth and the sun to unite again. He looked at the other 4. Awaken the sanctum sanctorum. We will fight a god with a god. In the deepest, most secure level of the holy land of Mary Geois, in a chamber frozen by technology and bound by ancient seals, a single, sleeping figure was chained to a throne of black sea stone. The figure was cloaked in shadow, but its form was undeniably human. As the elder spoke the command, a light flickered on a console, and a nutrient-rich fluid began to pump through tubes connected to the figure. Slowly, reluctantly, 2 eyes opened in the darkness. They were eyes that had not seen the light of the world for centuries. And they burned with a cold, empty, celestial fire. The world government's ultimate weapon, their own chained god, was waking up. The real war was about to begin. Chapter 7 End.